cautious, over the last year or so that we've been chatting on the fixed income markets. What is your sense for defaults going forward? How do you think this is going to play out? And of course, I'm also asking you to kind of share with us kind of your economic outlook as well.
Well, if we begin maybe by looking at the loan market as well as the high yield market, the compression that we spoke to, the overall compression and spread that we've seen in high yield, I think high yield now is just a touch inside of 800 basis points over treasuries, ignores the fact that there's also been tremendous bifurcation within the high yield space and the bank loan space, meaning that there's actually been growth in the size of the cohorts that are priced to yield more than 10%, let's say. So as we've seen improvement in the better credits, the ones that are viewed as probably survivors, or at least survivors for some period of time through this, let's ignore the fact that we have a significant cohort of names that are going to have to go through some kind of restructuring type of process. I think it's anyone's guess, how high defaults are going to get, but they're going to go a whole lot higher. You got the first hint of that, in a way, I suppose, from the bank earnings today, from Wells's and J.P. Morgan's, and the significant increase in loan loss allowance that goes into the earnings numbers. So we're still, I think, at the front end of this. We should remember we've only been shut down for a matter of weeks, maybe a month, and it's really unclear, as I said earlier, what the ultimate impact of shutting down large swaths of the U.S. economy are going to be. Just as a total anecdote, but an important one, I think, is my understanding is that 25% of the workforce in Michigan has already applied for unemployment. That, I think, kind of starts to give you an idea that any type of optimism in terms of pricing at this point may be getting a little bit ahead of itself.
Well, haven't you checked the stock market? Everything's fine, Ted. Everything's great. We just had the biggest rally since 1974. I remember when we talked to you, as Paul referenced, you've been bearish for a while, and back in November you wrote about the liquidity issues that we're going to be facing in the credit markets, and certainly that did come to pass in a massive way. Are you becoming more constructive in terms of what you're buying just based on some of the dislocations, or do you think that there is another leg lower in the repricing that we're seeing across credit markets?
Well, first of all, there has been actually tremendous opportunity in certain parts of the credit markets, and we've taken advantage of that. The first place that we took advantage of it, in fact, the way we have oftentimes articulated the game plan in the late cycle type of environment that we felt we were in, is step zero, so to speak, is get prepared and build defensive. And then step one was the foray into those segments of the marketplace that are the most bendable, the types of assets that are not really going to be subject to solvency challenge. And so step one was a significant increase in our agency mortgage type of exposure, in part with the expectation that the Fed would probably liquefy that area first. So we added substantially to our positions in agency mortgages. We've actually been selling them down as the prices have improved. The next step, and we have engaged this as well, is the liquefaction of fortress balance sheets. So we've seen Intel come to the market, Exxon, Kimberly-Clark, Procter & Gamble, Disney, and the spread levels were 200 to 250 basis points wider than where they had been in January. Okay, so do the math, right? 200 basis points on a 20 duration, a 30-year maturity instrument is 40%. It's 40 points. And we've already realized, we've actually round-tripped through some of those names already. So we are constructive on the fortress balance sheets and credit. We certainly already have almost round-tripped with respect to the agency mortgages. And we expect there's going to be a lot more opportunity. But it'll probably be in areas that you have to do a little bit more credit analysis than 90 seconds worth, which we kind of joke about almost, is all you need to do when you're looking at Disney, P&G, and Intel.
Hey, Tad, thanks so much for joining us. We're so glad we were able to chat with you today to get your thoughts on what has just been an extraordinary time in the markets and the experience that you have. Tad Revell, Chief Investment Officer for Fixed Income at TCW. Again, over $200 billion in assets under management. So they clearly see everything that crosses traders' desks. They see every deal across all asset classes within fixed income. So Tad always provides just a great overview, Lisa, of kind of what's going on out there. And I think the issue is he did see clearly some value, I think, recently, but a lot of that value has been kind of repriced back into the market to a certain extent. So we will continue to chat with Tad about all things fixed income going forward. Right now, let's head down to Washington, D.C., get world and national headlines with Martin DeCaro. Martin, what do you have?
Hello, Paul. They're considered critical to getting New Yorkers, all Americans, safely back to work. Comprehensive coronavirus testing kits, which have thus far eluded U.S. health officials. Today, New York Mayor Bill de Blasio announced the city has a deal to receive 50,000 test kits a week, and the supplier is in Indiana.
Our efforts to get them consistently from Washington, D.C., no result. Our efforts to get them from the open market never could get a reliable partner until today with ARIA Diagnostics.
New York leaders not ready to begin lifting stay-at-home measures yet. The state's death toll has surpassed 10,000. Globally, cases surpass 1.9 million. Deaths top 120,000. President Trump is pushing to reopen at least parts of the U.S. economy in a couple weeks. He'll announce a council of doctors and business people today. They'll advise him on the matter. The president's also in a burgeoning dispute with state governments over who has authority to let people go back to work, school, and houses of worship. Maryland's Republican Governor Larry Hogan, the chair of the National Governors Association, disagrees with President Trump's claim of total authority.
Well, it's not my understanding of the Constitution, but look, I think we had a very productive discussion with the nation's governors, with the vice president and some of the top leaders. We have some real cooperation going forward.
Some 263 Marylanders have died of COVID-19. In neighboring D.C., more than 60 have died. About 3/4 of them were black in a city where less than half the population's African American. In Sweden, where the government has resisted strict lockdowns, a regrettable milestone. More than 1,000 people have died of COVID-19. Prime Minister concedes stricter measures may be necessary. Global news 24 hours a day on air, and a quick take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in 120 countries.
You've always relied on Bloomberg's strong Asian presence.
You didn't mention any particular areas in China. Let me just go to Hong Kong.
And now you need it even more.
Where are we in terms of understanding President Xi?
Bloomberg Daybreak Asia.
We're starting to see infections in some of the Asian countries.
Tonight at 6 Eastern.
Do you ever get the feeling some people just weren't prepared?
On Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
To buy your home, you became a house hunting ace, learned about loans, scoured neighborhoods, and asked the right questions. Now you're queen of your castle. If you manage that, you can get your retirement plan on track. Visiting aceyourretirement.org can help. With 401k tips and smart saving strategies, you'll feel empowered to own your retirement like you own your home. Go to aceyourretirement.org. Because when it comes to clearing financial hurdles, you're an ace. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Are you interested in a challenging and exciting career? One where you can be part of solving complex challenges across industries and geographies. Bloomberg's ever-expanding technology, data, news, and media services foster innovation, empower clients, and offer nearly limitless opportunities for career growth. Visit Bloomberg.com/careers today to view our current job opportunities. Bloomberg LP is an equal opportunity employer. The address once again is Bloomberg.com/careers.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care about each other, about our planet, about creating a better world for everyone, and becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Make sure to accept your offer by the UCAS deadline and visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
At Asda, we're doing all that we can to keep shelves full and prices low. So you can pick up a 7-pack of Grower Selection bananas or 400 grams of seedless red grapes, both just £1 each. Asda. Save money, live better. Selected stores subject to availability.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Hit the court anytime with these great NBA podcasts on TuneIn. The Low Post.
So what struck you about this potential head-to-head matchup? What did we learn now that Zion is involved and LeBron and Zion go at each other for the first time?
You know, I still think both teams have to figure out kind of who are their guys when they get into a fourth quarter. I think you saw that with both of them. There were some kind of odd moments.
The Ringer NBA Show.
Who ended up winning the thing. But I did watch for a little bit when it was DeAndre Ayton and Zach LaVine playing against each other. And then as the days went on, Devin Booker was involved. Tell me you've seen the clip of Devin Booker when I can't remember who his opponent was.
Or the Haber Show.
At the end, it's because I worked in the NBA in the front office, and when I was 14 years old, my family moved back from Sudan to America. I jumped high school here in New York
Find these and more NBA podcasts right here on TuneIn.
This week on the New Yorker Radio Hour, we'll look at race, politics, and the pandemic.
Social distancing is critical, but you have to have a certain class position, really, to be able to fully engage that practice.
I'll talk with Kianga Yamada-Taylor. Listen to this episode of the New Yorker Radio Hour on TuneIn today.
To help make the most of your time at home, TuneIn is sharing our top activities for social distancing. Tip 3, have a game night. In fact, why not make it a game day? Whether you're quarantined with kids or roommates, nothing passes the time like a game of cards, Pictionary, charades, dominoes, or Never Have I Ever. If you've got the hardware, break out the video game console and enjoy hours of guilt-free gaming. For more indoor inspiration, search Listen From Home on TuneIn.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with a podcast on TuneIn. For expert analysis straight from the WWE to Steve Austin's no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen. The sports world is full of inspirational stories of heroic figures. It also has its fair share of shady characters. Aaron Hernandez, Donald Sterling, Bikram Choudhury, O.J. Simpson. For detailed retellings of some of the darkest sagas in sports, search sports documentaries on the TuneIn app. Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind. Giving up, I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the country.
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier, that also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is,
or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn.
And breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Stocks continue to move ahead today as signs continue to build that the spread of the coronavirus may be slowing. Well off earlier highs, stocks are still higher. We look at those numbers every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg Radio. The S&P 500's up 1.9%, up 53. The Dow's up 1.6%, up 360. And the NASDAQ is up 2.6%, up 216. The 10-year is up 11/30 seconds. The yield is 0.73%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is down 5.3% at $21.22 a barrel, while COMEX gold is little changed at $762.20 an ounce. The dollar yen 107.17, the euro $1.0961, and the British pound $1.2588. Boeing lost orders for 150 more of its beleaguered 737 MAX aircraft last month as travel bookings plunged amid the COVID-19 pandemic, squeezing airlines and aircraft lessors. Right now, Boeing is down 2.7%. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
You're listening to Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Well, J.P. Morgan, Chase, and Wells Fargo kicked off earnings season for the big banks today, and I think what investors were really focusing on was those loan loss provisions. Combined, those two banks set aside more than $12 billion to cover defaults across the economy. So just extraordinary numbers coming out of there. To get a sense of kind of what we're going to see from the banking sector coming up, we welcome Chris Whalen, chairman of Whalen Global Advisors based in New York. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Boy, those loan loss provisions were just extraordinary. What's your takeaway?
Well, I was actually too conservative in my model for the industry. I said, fine, we'll double provisions this month, and then double them, or this quarter, and then double them again. Second quarter, that gets up to 2008 levels. But I think J.P. Morgan decided to go big. I agree with what they've done. Takes a little pressure off them in the next couple quarters because they've put a fair amount of money out there. But they've also said that they expect loss rates to be extraordinary. And that says to me well above 2008 levels. So we're starting to use the 1930s as our model simply because of the dislocation both in terms of unemployment and small and mid-sized enterprises, which looks to be a horror show. I think we could see a large chunk of the service sector essentially disappear simply because they don't have a lot of capital. And if you impose losses on them, you take them out of circulation in terms of revenue, they die. And small businesses turn over quite a lot anyway. But when you put this kind of stress situation on them, the only sector of this economy that's liquid right now are basically those that are supported directly by the government, particularly the mortgage sector. But everything else is an orphan. And I think that's going to have a real serious repercussion on GDP and on how long it takes us to get through. I think a couple of observers, in fact, have suggested we may not see normal earnings, normal kind of trend earnings for a couple of years. And I think that's what the banks are telling us.
What about when it comes to the health of the banks themselves? Because a lot of regulators and analysts have said that the banks are incredibly well capitalized, and the fact that they can put aside such a big amount for loan losses that they're expecting shows their fortitude and their fortress-like balance sheets. Would you agree with that characterization?
Oh, very much. And I think, the political dialogue on this is immediately focused on the banks and the fact that they pay dividends. We've already gotten most banks to stop share repurchases, which is worth $110 billion a year in terms of capital retention for the top 20 banks. That's enough. That funds your reserve build, by the way, Paul. So I think that what I would tell policymakers is leave the dividends alone. You're going to deal with this on a bank-by-bank basis, but you don't want to cut off that cash flow to investors because there are a lot of people who depend on dividends from public companies to pay their bills. And I think it's important for us to realize that the banks are well capitalized and they have $150 billion in cash flow every quarter, earnings, share repurchases, dividends that they can draw on to meet this wave of default. And so I think that's the good news. I would agree with you, Lisa.
So, Chris, let's take a look at some of the regional banks. Are they in a similar position in terms of relative health of their balance sheets?
Well, they deal with a smaller community typically, so they will have more idiosyncratic risk elements in their portfolio. They're not as diversified, but diversification is not going to help us this time. I think the country generally is going to see both heavy consumer default activity, and we're also going to see a lot of business defaults. So the good news is, unlike 2008, this didn't start on Wall Street. It didn't start with subprime mortgages that nobody wanted anymore, trillions of them, remember. This time around, it's an external shock, which has taken GDP down significantly and is pushing unemployment up to ridiculous levels. I mean, in credit models, unemployment's your biggest factor. That's what you start with. And over the weekend, my wife kept looking at me and go, why are you in such a bad mood? Yeah. It was because I was writing my earnings note for the banks. And basically, by the second quarter, I think 2/3 of bank earnings are going to be gone because of provisioning and other expenses, operating expenses. And then over time, they're going to come out of the hole. So to me, I'm still very positive on the banks. I own banks. JP's at 1.2 times book value this morning. So it's not like they're cheap. But on the other hand, I think that the whole industry is going to have to divert income. They're not going to consume capital. That's always the misnomer in these discussions, right? They're going to use the income that they generate to plow through the losses, and they'll be okay.
Yeah, when you talk about job losses, I'm just struck by the fact that nearly 1 in 10 Americans lost their jobs in the past 3 weeks, and probably we're going to get another multi-million print in the jobless claims report that we're getting out on Thursday. In the meantime, there's a question about consolidation. Does the likes of JP Morgan end up more powerful at the end of this because they do have the capacity to withstand this and that fortress-like balance sheet? What do you think?
Well, JP is not going to get any bigger, but they do have a lot of monopoly power. They are also reacting to the madness we see in Washington at the Federal Housing Finance Administration. The regulator for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac basically came out and said that they wouldn't support the non-bank servicers, who are the most important part of the mortgage market. So JP changed their warehouse guidelines last week. They basically cut off all the non-banks in terms of funding for new loans and also for servicing advances, and it's really bad. We need to get the government on track here because we don't need them saying bad things in public, and we don't need to have a regulator out attacking the institutions he's responsible for regulating and preserving. So I think we need to get everybody on the same page. The Fed's great. The other regulators, Ginnie Mae and the FHA, are awesome. They've been moving heaven and earth. But I worry that the default wave we're going to see, Lisa, is going to be really big.
Chris Whalen, thank you so much for being with us, Chairman of Whalen Global Advisors. I'm Lisa Abramowitz with Paul Sweeney, and this is Bloomberg Markets.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. We're getting that first look at coronavirus damage in the first earnings reports released today, but Wall Street is pinning its hopes on signs the virus may be peaking or leveling off. That's bringing gains of about 1 1/3 to 2 2/3%. The Dow up 313 points, the Nasdaq 216, the S&P 50. JP Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo both saw plunging profits last quarter. Wells Fargo posting only a penny per share of profit. Both companies are reporting their highest set-asides for loan defaults in a decade. Johnson & Johnson saw earnings and sales rise beyond Wall Street targets because of its consumer division. There was a spike in Tylenol sales as we got ready to stay home. The company doesn't see that continuing this quarter. With elective surgeries canceled, its medical device sales should fall. And airlines around the world could see $314 billion in revenue wiped out this year, the latest estimate from a trade group. Joan Doniger, Bloomberg Radio.
To protect his home and family from disaster, Steve used courage, wisdom, and his camera phone.
That should do it.
Way to go, Steve! By simply taking digital pictures of his family's important documents, Steve can always have them stored safely online, no matter when disaster strikes. Learn other simple ways to protect your home and family before a natural disaster at ready.gov. That's ready.gov. A message from FEMA and the Ad Council.
Are you interested in a challenging and exciting career? One where you can be part of solving complex challenges across industries and geographies. Bloomberg's ever-expanding technology, data, news, and media services foster innovation, empower clients, and offer nearly limitless opportunities for career growth. Visit Bloomberg.com/careers today to view our current job opportunities. Bloomberg LP is an equal opportunity employer. The address once again is Bloomberg.com/careers.
Okay, people, I've got the daily checklist. Who today has eaten dinner for breakfast? Tick. Started a chore you'll never finish? Tick. Done a conference call in your pajamas? Tick. Here's another for your list. BritBox. Streaming the BBC, ITV, Channel 5, and now Channel 4. All in one place and ad-free. So add BritBox to your list and get a 30-day free trial of the biggest box of British box sets. Search BritBox free trial. Tick. Biggest compared to other SVOD providers. Auto-renews at $5.99 a month unless cancelled. T's and C's apply.
Hit the court anytime with these great NBA podcasts on TuneIn. The Low Post
So what struck you about this potential head-to-head matchup? What did we learn now that Zion is involved and LeBron and Zion go at each other for the first time?
You know, I still think both teams have to figure out kind of who are their guys when they get into a fourth quarter. I think you saw that with both of them. There were some kind of odd moments.
The Ringer NBA Show.
Who ended up winning the thing. But I did watch for a little bit when it was DeAndre Ayton and Zach LaVine playing against each other. And then as the days went on, Devin Booker was involved. Tell me you've seen the clip of Devin Booker when I can't remember who his opponent was.
Or the Haber Show.
At the end, it's because I worked in the NBA in a front office. And, when I was 14 years old, my family moved back from Sudan to America. I jumped high school here in New York
Find these and more NBA podcasts right here on TuneIn. Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind, giving up. I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the
country. Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier. That also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is...
Or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn.
To help make the most of your time at home, TuneIn is sharing our top activities for social distancing. Tip number 5, cooking something. We all get stuck in a culinary rut with our normal routine. Shake things up in the kitchen by trying an ambitious new recipe or an over-the-top dessert. If cooking really isn't your thing, you can always support your local restaurants by ordering out. For more indoor inspiration, search Listen from Home on TuneIn.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Markets.
Coming up, Karen Mills, former SBA administrator and senior fellow at Harvard Business School. She's going to talk to us about the federal bailout of small businesses and how that's going. Plus, we're also going to have the press conference from New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. And also, we're awaiting comments from President Trump as he participates in a meeting with recovered COVID-19 patients. But first, let's go to Greg Jarrett of Bloomberg News for a Bloomberg Business Flash. Greg.
My hands up. I'm at my desk and prepared to participate, Paul. The S&P is extending its rally from March lows, while the NASDAQ has surged as much as 3.3% with gains in giant tech companies, pushing the index to its 50, 100, and 200-day moving averages. That would be 200-day. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg Radio. The S&P is now up 2.1%, up 59. The Dow's up 1 3/4%, up 407, and the NASDAQ's up 2.9%, up 235. The 10-year is currently up 10.30 seconds with a yield of 0.73%. West Texas Intermediate crude's down 5 3/4% now at $21.12 per barrel. COMEX gold is up 0.3%. It's $17.6620 an ounce. The dollar yen 107.14. The euro $1.0960 and the British pound $1.2598. U.S. states may face budget deficits of $500 billion combined over the next 2 years as the deep economic slowdown causes revenue to plunge, paving the way for deep spending cuts or tax increases that could exert a drag on recovery. That's the estimate from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
You're listening to Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
A lot of controversy, a lot of conflicting reports about how well the Small Business Administration has rolled out the program that Congress passed in order to get funding to smaller businesses amid the coronavirus shutdowns. There's no one better to reflect on just how well or poorly that rollout has been handled than Karen Mills, the former SBA administrator, as well as a senior fellow at Harvard Business School. And Karen, I'm so pleased that we have you. I'm wondering, from your perspective, do you feel like this program was rolled out in the most efficient way that it could have, based on the fact that it's unprecedented in its scope and trying to deal with a problem that's unprecedented also in its pervasiveness and depth?
Well, it's nice to talk to you. You know, this is an overwhelming crisis for small business, probably the worst I've ever seen. And as you know, I was in the seat in 2009 when we had a pretty bad small business job loss. That year we put out $30 billion over a course of a year. Now we're talking about $349 billion in a month. So there's no question that this, volume was going to have a bumpy start. And what I'm happy about right now is that we are seeing banks actually pull the money through. J.P. Morgan said that they've got maybe $9 billion.
Karen, I'm so sorry to do this. We'll have to pick this back up another time. Right now, Governor Andrew Cuomo making comments at his daily coronavirus briefing. Let's listen in.
So that's a good sign, but basically flat. So we think we are at the apex, on the plateau. The number of hospitalizations went up, flattened, continuing to flatten. Good sign. Technically, the number's down a tad. Statistically irrelevant, but better than being up. The net change in total hospitalizations, if you look at the curve, which is what we look at, the curve is down. When you do the 3-day average, which is more accurate than any 1 day, because remember, this reporting mechanism is new. We just put it in during this situation, so I wouldn't bet all the chips on any 1 day. But when you look at 3 days, you look at the overall curve, we think it's indicative. So the 3-day average is down. The net change in ICU admissions is down. Again, the ICU admissions I take with a grain of salt, since hospitals are no longer what they were, and they're basically all ICU wards. Intubations is a real number. That's the number of people who are being put on a ventilator. About 80% of those people will never come off a ventilator. So when you see the intubations, that is proportionate to the number of people we will lose. And that's what we've been watching all along. People go into the hospital, most get treated and are discharged. Some are not discharged. If they're intubated, about 80% of the people who are intubated will not come off the ventilator. The number of new people going into the hospital per day is also down, but we still have 1,600 new COVID cases yesterday. So we have 1,600 people new coming into the hospital, some being discharged, and the net is what we've been watching. But it's also interesting to note that you still have 1,600 new people walking into the hospital or who are in a hospital and then diagnosed with COVID. So the volume is still high, and that's why the hospitals are still working very hard. We have been watching for growth outside of New York City, Long Island, Westchester, Rockland. That has basically been flat. There have been little hot spots here and there. The Department of Health has been very good and aggressive in jumping on those hot spots and tamping them down, test, isolate, trace. And you see the numbers by region across the state. Proportionately, obviously, downstate New York, which is what we've been talking about, but looking for growth towards Long Island, Westchester, Rockland, rest of the state, proportionately, upstate is very, very low to everything else in the state. This is something else we're watching. This is the number of deaths in nursing homes. and the nursing homes have been an increasing issue. The nursing home issue was flagged by the first cases we had in the state of Washington, because that is the vulnerable population in the vulnerable place. And we've been worrying about nursing homes from day one, as we saw in the state of Washington. But you see the percentage of loss of life is getting higher in the nursing homes compared to the hospitals. Lives lost yesterday, 778. That number is up, and that is, to me, the most painful number. And it has been the most painful number every day. And those New Yorkers are in our thoughts and prayers. You look at the past few days and the number of lives lost, it's basically flat at a devastating level of pain and grief. But it evidences everything else we're seeing, which is basically a flattening at this level. The statisticians will say number of lives lost is a lagging indicator, which is a nice scientific term, but it doesn't mean it just is not just terrible, terrible, terrible news, and nothing we can do about it. Although many New Yorkers are doing everything they can to save people's lives on a daily basis at great personal cost to themselves. Total number of deaths is 10,834. What we have learned through this process is that our actions determine our destiny, and that's actually good news. We changed the curve. Every projection model, White House, CDC, coronavirus, White House task force, Columbia, Cornell, Gates-funded group, every projection had a higher rate of infection, higher rate of death. CDC was talking about over 1 million people. CDC was talking about projections that would have swamped the nation's hospital system. That didn't happen. Why didn't it happen? Because of what we did. And that's important to remember and realize. We changed the curve. Better way to say it is we are changing the curve every day. We have shown that we control the virus doesn't control us. And this is a big deal. Look, we could have been in a place where we couldn't stop the spread of the virus. We could have done this whole lockdown, closed down, shut down, and you still could have seen those numbers going up. That would have been a frightening place. We should take some comfort in the fact that we have demonstrated that we can actually control the spread of the virus. Now, tremendous, dramatic pain to do it, shut down everything. But thank God we can control the spread. Can you imagine how bad a situation it would be if we did all of this and you still saw those numbers going up? You lock up your family, you protect them, but somehow the virus still infiltrated the house. That would have been frightening. So there is good news in this. But there's also a caution flag. We are, in some ways, artificially controlling that curve. We've taken all these extraordinary actions and we are reducing the rate of infection. That means whatever we do today will determine the infection rate tomorrow. It is total cause and effect.
A new language.
So you stop doing what you're doing or you behave differently and you will get a different result. And that's important to remember as we talk about reopening. Everybody's anxious to reopen. I get it. I'm anxious to reopen. Cara and Michaela want out of the house. I trust you. They trust me. They love me. They love spending time with me, but they're sort of done with the entire experience. And that's universal. People need to get back to work. The state needs an economy. We cannot sustain this for a prolonged period of time. Everybody agrees. But everybody will also say how you reopen is everything, because of the first point, which is we are now keeping down that rate of infection. And if you start acting differently, you will see a corresponding increase in that rate of infection. And the worst scenario would be if we did all of this, we got that number down, everybody went to extraordinary means, and then we go to reopen and we reopen too fast, or we reopen and there's unanticipated consequences and we see that number go up again. Well, you're being hyper cautious. Oh, really? Go look at other countries that went through exactly this, started to reopen, and then they saw the infection rate go back up again. So let's at least learn from past mistakes. We've laid out a way to reopen, coming up with a comprehensive plan. First, that is regional in nature. We have 7 states that we're working with. The virus doesn't understand state boundaries, doesn't understand that it needs a passport. You know, it defies all of our norms. So how do you put the best minds together in a 7-state area, come up with a regional strategy? Because the virus can get on Amtrak, the virus can get on a plane, the virus can get in a car and drive up 95. We're all connected. And in truth, since nobody knows where they're going, and nobody's done this before, let's think together and let's plan together. If we can't come up with a common plan, let's see if we can come up with a plan that's not contradictory. Let's see if we can get to a place where what Connecticut does, New Jersey does, is not counter to what we're doing here in New York. And that's the point of the 7 states working together. Also, the point is it doesn't work unless you coordinate the reactivation of all the systems. I did this graphic because no one got when I went like this yesterday, and I said the gears have to mesh. This is what I was saying. I could see, Nick, that you did not get what this meant. So that's a clarifier for you personally from yesterday. We also have to be clear on who is responsible for each element of the opening. The president said last night that he has total authority for determining how and when states reopen. That is not an accurate statement, in my opinion. Now that we know that government actually matters and government is relevant and that government has to be smart, because what government does is determining how this goes. It's literally determining, in many ways, life and death. We have to be smart about it. The federal-state relationship is central to our democracy. This has been a topic discussed since our founding fathers first decided to embark on this entire venture, right? This is basic federalism, the role of the states and the role of the federal government. And it is important that we get this right. Our founding fathers understood, and we have to remember today, that the balance between the state and the federal, that magnificent balance that is articulated in the Constitution, is the essence of our democracy. We don't have a king in this country. We didn't want a king, so we have a constitution and we elect the president. The states, the colonies, formed the federal government. The federal government did not form the states. It's the colonies that ceded certain responsibility to a federal government. All other power remains with the states. It's basic to our Constitution and that federal-state relationship. Hamilton, who in many ways was representative of this discussion of the balance of power. State governments possess inherent advantages which will ever give them an influence and ascendancy, a beautiful word, over the national government. and will forever preclude the possibility of federal encroachments on the states. That their liberties indeed can be subverted by the federal head is repugnant to every rule of political calculation. Strong language, but that was the premise. So there are laws and there are facts, even in this wild political environment. What do? We do what we do because we are New York tough, but tough is more complex than many people think it is. Within that word tough is smart and united and disciplined and loving. They're not inconsistent to be tough and to be loving. Let me make a personal point, not necessarily a factual point. The president did his briefing last night, and the president was clearly unhappy. The president did a number of tweets this morning where he's clearly unhappy. Did a tweet about mutiny on the Bounty and governors are mutineers. I didn't follow the exact meaning of the tweet, but the basic essence of the tweet was that he was not happy with governors and that this was a mutiny. The president is clearly spoiling for a fight on this issue. The worst thing we can do in all of this is start with political division and start with partisanship. The best thing we have done throughout this past 44 days is we've worked together and we haven't raised political flags. Even in this hyper-partisan environment, even though it's an election year, even though the politics is so intense, we said not here, not in this. This is too important for anyone to play politics. It was a no politics zone, right? This is just about doing the right thing, working together. And that's important, and we have to stay there. We're all in a little bit of a reflective mood. I'm in a reflective mood. And everything we do here is so important, and every day is so important. And I was thinking after the president made his comments and looking at some of the remarks and looking at the tweets, reminded me of a poster I saw when I was in grade school. St. Gerard Magella, Queens, New York, Catholic school. Red blazer, gray pants, white shirt, little clip-on tie, the tie with the hook. Remember the hook tie that you had to put the hook on, and then it looked like you had a real tie, which I never understood because the hook was harder to do. You had to hook and then you had to adjust the band, which was harder than just teaching a kid how to just tie the tie. Would have been easier. But I was in grade school and there was that poster that came from a Sandberg poem, I think. Suppose they gave a war and nobody came. And I was looking at the poster, and I didn't really get it because even then I was very literal. Suppose they gave a war and nobody came. So I'm looking at the poster, and a priest came up behind me and said, "What's wrong, Andrew?" I said, "I don't understand that. Suppose they gave a war and nobody came. How could that happen? Then you wouldn't have a war." He said, "Well, that's the point. The point is what would happen if people just refused to engage? They just refused to fight." And I still didn't get it and he said, sometimes it's better to walk away from a fight than engage it. Sometimes it takes more strength, frankly, to walk away from a fight than engage it. The president will have no fight with me. I will not engage in it. I've sat here every day for 44 years asking New Yorkers to remember that this is not about me, it's about we. I understand you're personally inconvenienced. I understand you're frustrated and stressed and anxious and you're feeling pain. Think about we. Think about get past yourself and think about society and think about your family and think about interconnection and act responsibly for everyone else. This is no time for politics, and it is no time to fight. I put my hand out in total partnership and cooperation with the president. If he wants a fight, he's not going to get it from me. Period. This is going to take us working together. We have a real challenge ahead. Just because those numbers are flattening, it's no time to relax. We're not out of the woods. In this reopening, we could lose all the progress we made in 1 week if we do it wrong. And we have a number of challenges ahead. We have to figure out how to do this. How do you have a public health strategy that works with an economic reactivation strategy? Nobody has done this before. How do you start to increase the number of essential workers? How do you learn the lessons of the past? How do you start to do the massive testing that we're going to have to do here and that we don't have the capacity to do today? The capacity does not exist. The private sector companies that do testing, we can only get about 60,000 tests per month. That's not enough. We're going to do the antibody testing, but that's not enough either. How do we do this? Put together this whole testing system and do it in a matter of weeks. It is a real question. How do we use technology? Apple and other companies are working on using technology to do tracking. How do we do that? And how do we do it fast? And how do we take all our strength and our collective strength and take this nation's collective strength and figure out how to do those challenges? 50 years ago this week, Apollo 13 gets damaged 220,000 miles from Earth. Somehow they figure out how to get a spaceship back 220,000 miles 50 years ago. That's America. Okay, figure out how to do testing. Figure out how to use technology to do tracing. That's what we have to work on.
You've been listening to New York Governor Andrew Cuomo holding his daily coronavirus briefing. The bad news is that the death toll rose once again yesterday, 778, bringing the total to New York State to 10,834. The good news, however, is that the net change in hospitalizations is actually negative for the first time, and that suggests or confirms for Governor Cuomo that the state is at its apex in terms of the virus curve. The governor also suggesting that if the President Trump wants a fight with Andrew Cuomo, he's not going to get it. Andrew Cuomo is not going to engage. Governor Cuomo says his focus, at least, is on the issue at hand. So some of the highlights from the daily press briefing is very interesting.
I'm just going to throw out there that President Trump probably won't take that as a total peace offering. That's just my sense, but just throwing that out there.
Do it. Very good. All right, so we do have green on the screen here. The S&P up over 2%. We'll get you all the data. Coming up, Balance of Power, David Weston. That'll be coming up in just moments. He will drive the conversation forward. For Lisa Abramowitz, I'm Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg.
In addition to Bloomberg Radio, you can catch the latest news and biggest newsmakers on Bloomberg Television. Look for us on DirecTV Channel 353 or check your local listings.
This is a message from the government. Coronavirus is a national emergency, life-threatening for people of all ages everywhere in the UK. To help save lives, you must stay home. Only go outside for food, health reasons, daily exercise, or to work, but only if you cannot work from home. Stay home. Anyone can get it, and anyone can spread it. Stay home to help protect the NHS and frontline staff working to save lives. Coronavirus. Stay home, protect the NHS, save lives.
For weeks, we've heard about panicked shoppers causing a run on toilet paper by irrationally hoarding it. But that ignores one key factor.
That the toilet paper you use when you leave the home is not the same toilet paper you use at home.
How incomplete information, whether about supply chains or infection rates, leads to incomplete narratives. Don't miss this week's On the Media from WNYC. Listen to the On the Media podcast from WNYC studios on TuneIn today.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with a podcast on TuneIn. For expert analysis straight from the WWE to Steve Austin's no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen. Hit the court anytime with these great NBA podcasts on TuneIn. The Low Post.
So what struck you about this potential head-to-head matchup? What did we learn now that Zion is involved and LeBron and Zion go at each other for the first time?
You know, I still think both teams have to figure out kind of who are their guys when they get into a fourth quarter. I think you saw that with both of them. There were some kind of odd moments.
The Ringer NBA show.
Who ended up winning the thing. But I did watch for a little bit when it was DeAndre Ayton and Zach LaVine playing against each other. And then as the days went on, Devin Booker was involved. Tell me you've seen the clip of Devin Booker when I can't remember who his opponent was.
Or the Haber Show.
At the end, it's because I worked in the NBA in a front office, and when I was 14 years old, my family moved back from Sudan to America. I jumped high school here in New York
Find these and more NBA podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Did you know that with TuneIn's local radio feature, you can stream live FM and AM stations broadcasting in your area? Discover local news, talk, and music stations. Navigate to the local radio section under Browse to listen locally on TuneIn.
Financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. I'm David Weston. We're going to start the program today with a market check, because equity markets are up on some news that perhaps the coronavirus crisis is easing a bit. And for a full report, we go now to Abigail Doolittle.
Well, David, we do have stocks higher on this Tuesday. The S&P 500 right now up about 2%, off its highs, at the highs up about 3%. And as you were mentioning, this probably does have to do with folks out there thinking that there are signs that the coronavirus, the spread, is easing. But what makes this so interesting, just yesterday, David, you and I were talking about how the big driver for stocks this week could be bank earnings. Quite frankly, they're pretty miserable. JP Morgan's profits plunged to the lowest since 2013. Wells Fargo withdrew their net interest income outlook. So you can see banks sharply down. That KBW Bank Index down about 2.8%. So a real divergence there. And as a result, there is another divergence. We may have risk stocks higher, David, but we also have haven bonds and the yen higher. The haven yen, that Japanese yen, now up for a fourth day in a row. So it tells you not everybody is believing not just the rally today, but the rally that we've had in recent weeks.
Yeah, Abigail, in fairness, you can't blame investors that they don't know exactly which way this is going, because I don't think anyone does. So you had the bank stocks started up a bit, and then they came down, as you said. At the same time, I think some of the stocks that have been beaten down pretty badly have sort of come back, haven't they?
That is a big piece of the rally over the last couple of weeks, and one reason that some strategists and traders out there don't like it in terms of the companies that had been hit so hard by the virus back in January, February, and March, such as the leisure companies, the airlines. There has been a bit of a bounce back over the last couple of weeks. So some are saying that the rally that we've had off of the lows from March, that there are holes in it. And if you take a look at a year-to-date chart of the S&P 500, it's really pretty incredible, because there's that huge move down, 35% from the peak to the trough. Now we're about halfway back up. It's very hard to know which side, where the greater risk is. It to the upside, don't fight the tape in the Fed, or is it to the downside, that we don't know how bad the economic repercussions of this virus crisis will be? Some are saying that we really need to see not the numbers for the first quarter. We already know that's horrible, and most quarters companies have pulled their guidance, but it'll be the second quarter when it's a full quarter of the economic toll, not just March. So lots of uncertainty out there. Year to date, you can see down about 12%. But today, we do have stocks higher, David.
Great. Thank you so much to Abigail Doolittle for that report on the markets. In the meantime, because there is some reports that perhaps the coronavirus is easing a bit, we're starting to think about how to return the economy to full steam. And there's a tug of war that's developed between the President of the United States, Donald Trump, on the one hand, and some of the governors across the country. Yesterday with Donald Trump saying he got to decide when we started, some governors saying they have their own plans. For a report, we turn now to our White House correspondent. He is Josh Wingrove. Josh, welcome. So what is going on between the White House on the one hand and some of our nation's governors?
Well, I think it's a sort of hot potato back and forth in a way where the president is saying he has this absolute authority. Now, it's a little unclear as to what he bases this on. The vice president seemed to think that these were emergency powers as opposed to overarching blanket authority, but the president seemed to think it was the latter. And so we've had New York's governor and others pushing back against that, saying that Trump is setting up for a constitutional crisis if he were to order a state like New York to open ahead of when the governor says is, the right time to do it. So that's the sort of jockeying that we're having right now. Cuomo saying we don't want a King Trump, we want a President Trump.
I was curious because you cover President Trump regularly. I was curious what your take was because although he did say, I have the authority to do this, I also heard him say, the governors who resist me will have a political price to pay. It didn't sound like he was saying it was legal. Is he basically setting them up, basically, to blame them if things go wrong?
Yeah, I think that that's true. Yesterday's press conference was a doozy by any measure. I know they're not often boring or brief affairs, but the president, I think that he's clearly trying to put himself in the driver's seat of this. He'd been playing nice for a while with the governors. That's sort of eased off a little bit now, where he's sort of turning to them. He today referred to them as mutineers in one tweet. And so we'll see. If, for instance, in the next few days, as Larry Kudlow said a few moments ago, the president announces guidelines for states to begin taking steps, and it's just a voluntary thing, then it's, not going to be a huge crisis. But if Trump gets up to the podium and says everyone should go back to work no matter what your governor says, then we're going to have a different ballgame.
Well, and in those remarks, Mr. Kudlow suggested that the president's looking at a rolling reentry. It's not going to be like flipping a light switch. So I wonder if there's a really big difference. But I do know, Josh, that I don't think the president set out national guidelines for when we shut it down. Why does he think he should be setting the guidelines for opening it back up?
Yeah, I think he is really anxious to get things back to work. Of course, he was running, 2 months ago, he's running for re-election on the economy pretty much squarely. We wrote overnight, though, that, listen, the step that they need to reopen things is testing. We just simply do not have enough testing. We don't have enough testing to test people with symptoms, let alone turn and contact trace all the people those people have met, let alone just do random testing to catch outbreaks before they pop up. And we don't even have a full antibody test, or at least not something that's widely available. So we don't know who's had it, we don't know who's recovered, and we don't know that if you've recovered, you have immunity, and if you do, for how long. So there are just so many unknowns right now. Testing will really be the key to solving this. And until that really ramps up, and we're talking, multiple times what we are able to do right now, 8 times or so by one estimate, then really a full reopening just isn't in the cards.
That's the one thing everyone seems to agree on. We need a lot more testing to reopen the economy. Thank you so much to Josh Wingrove. He reports in the White House for Bloomberg. And now it is time for Bloomberg First Word News. And for that, we go to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you. Former President Barack Obama has endorsed Joe Biden for president. In a video message, Obama said his former vice president has, quote, the character and the experience to guide us through one of our darkest times and heal us through a long recovery. He added, quote, choosing Joe to be my vice president was one of the best decisions I ever made, end quote. The Trump administration has eased a ban on exports of personal protective equipment. Bloomberg has learned there are now exemptions for exports to Canada and Mexico. Lawyers pointed out the shortcomings of rules rolled out last week. The U.S. medical system is grappling with shortages of masks and gowns for healthcare professionals. The European Union's chief Brexit negotiator is back at work. Michel Barnier had tested positive for coronavirus in March. Barnier said he would hold a video conference with UK Brexit counterpart David Frost tomorrow. Frost has also been isolating after showing symptoms of coronavirus. Japan is planning to begin cash handouts for those hurt by the pandemic as soon as next month. The country is planning an extra budget of $156 billion to try to offset the economic effects of the virus. The number of cases in Japan has climbed to more than 7,600. The country was put under a state of emergency last week, but many people were still seeing crowding shopping areas in parts of Tokyo. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
Thanks so much, Mark. Coming up next, France extends its lockdown even as its economy really struggles. We go to Paris, and Nicholas Dungan, he's a fellow at the Atlantic Council, for a full report. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
Mark it up.
Okay, people, I've got the daily checklist. Who today has eaten dinner for breakfast? Tick. Started a chore you'll never finish? Tick. Done a conference call in your pajamas? Tick. Here's another for your list. BritBox. Streaming the BBC, ITV, Channel 5, and now Channel 4. All in one place and ad-free. So add BritBox to your list and get a 30-day free trial of the biggest box of British box sets. Search BritBox free trial. Tick. Biggest compared to other SVOD providers. Auto-renews at $5.99 a month unless cancelled. T's and C's apply.
To help make the most of your time at home, TuneIn is sharing our top activities for social distancing. Tip number 5, cooking something. We all get stuck in a culinary rut with our normal routine. Shake things up in the kitchen by trying an ambitious new recipe or an over-the-top dessert. If cooking really isn't your thing, you can always support your local restaurants by ordering out. For more indoor inspiration, search Listen from Home on TuneIn.
Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind, giving up. I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the country.
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier, that also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is...
Or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn.
This week on the New Yorker Radio Hour, we'll look at race, politics, and the pandemic.
Social distancing is critical, but you have to have a certain class position, really, to be able to fully engage that practice.
I'll talk with Kianga Yamada-Taylor. Listen to this episode of the New Yorker Radio Hour on TuneIn today.
Want to know a quick, easy way to see if your favorite podcasts have a new episode available? Just go to the home screen on your TuneIn app and see the latest editions under the Your New Episode section. Happy listening.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Get the latest breaking news alerts and listening suggestions for news stations and podcasts. Let TuneIn keep you in the loop with push notifications. Just go to your device's settings and allow push notifications from TuneIn to get live alerts and recommendations on the audio you want to know about.
Get your MLB fix with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Fill your seventh inning stretch with the Ringer MLB Show.
I just can't get over it. It's like, well, Jeter Downs. Didn't realize he was a top. Like, my dad is drinking the Kool-Aid on this. He's like, of course. Mookie was going to leave. I'm like, what do you mean? You don't know that.
Slide into second with the Starting Nine podcast.
Nolan Arenado slides right into the top spot for a favorite baseball player.
active in the league right now. It is a pleasure to be sitting next to you, sir.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is we've been waiting a long time for this. We actually, in terms of like active
Round the bases with the StatCast podcast.
Ways of going about it. I picked third, so in some ways it made it easier for me. Mike, just to go over the first couple of picks, Mike took Barry Bonds, who I think was kind of the obvious guy to take number one, not only.
Catch these and more MLB podcasts right here on TuneIn. Get your daily dose of NFL shop talk with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Start your morning off right with Around the NFL.
Injured, depleted roster into the playoffs, and I didn't think they belonged in the playoffs.
I think overall, though, it was a great divisional round weekend because you got the first one.
Run into the end zone with the Move the Sticks podcast.
We had a fun little Zoom cocktail hour last night.
Oh, yeah.
What a star-studded affair. Greg, you were there for the earlier part, but it really popped off a little later on. We had Zach Goldman.
And dive deep into the sidelines with the Peter King podcast.
On the occasion of his 50th birthday, come down and record a little bit of retrospective on the life and times of Brett Lorenzo Favre.
That sounds like a bestseller.
It sounds like a precursor to a funeral. That's what it is.
I wasn't thinking that.
Explore these and more hard-hitting NFL podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Seeing it in Denmark, but now even talking at least parts of Italy, parts of Spain. Does that make the situation more difficult for the French and for Mr. Macron?
Well, interestingly enough, all of the confusion and all of the uncertainty that Josh Wingrove was just talking to you about a few minutes ago about the United States applies in Europe as well. And the reason is that this is not just a global crisis. It's also a crisis that affects everybody in different ways. So health is not a competency of the European Union. So it's not surprising to find different European Union countries taking different actions based on their culture, their own health systems, their own outlook for the economy, their own politics. And that emphasizes the fact that in Europe, as is the case everywhere else, this is not just one crisis after another, like the financial crisis, which was financial, then economic, then social, then political. This is everything at once. So it's not really surprising that we're getting different assessments in different countries and different political decisions in different countries, even though they're right next to each other. But what it does demonstrate is that the supranational institutions, the multilateral institutions, were not built to deal with this sort of thing. And only the national governments, and in some cases, for example, in the U.S., the local and state governments can actually make sense of this.
So, Nicholas, give us a sense, since it's all driven by the virus itself and its effect on people, what is the situation right now in terms of increased number of cases, deaths, I'm sorry to say, but also the pressure on the French national health system?
Actually, the health system has held up pretty well. It was very, very close to being saturated in the Ile-de-France, which is the greater Paris region, and the region called the Grand Est, which is Alsace, Lorraine, Moselle, Champagne, Ardennes. But that's held up pretty well, and there were transfers of sick people to neighboring countries, and Macron thanked them last night in his address. Switzerland, Germany. They also transferred people from the northeast to the southwest on military airplanes. So that's been managed well. I think the major, it looks like we're coming to the top of the curve here, but we've seen other countries, we've seen also more cases, for example, recently in Italy, so you can't ever be sure. What the problem here is there are virtually no masks, not very many gloves, and no tests available. So what you were talking about with your correspondent earlier, with Josh Wingrove, the lack of tests is going to be the big problem. And unlike Germany, France doesn't have enough tests to test that widely. So they're basically only testing people who are symptomatic, and that probably will continue to be the case. Macron promised last night that as of May 11th, there will be enough masks for every member of the population. And that is something which, the government is going to have to pull out of its hat. But the other problem is, quite frankly, and this goes back to your question about his leadership and his popularity ratings, he was very humble He said, I've made mistakes. I need to rethink myself. We clearly weren't as ready as we should be. But there actually weren't aside from this May 11th date, there weren't very many specifics in what he had to say. That's when things are going to start to unlock down, and the government will be publishing the directives and the instructions in the next few weeks. So it wasn't totally clear what's going to happen. We know there won't be sort of summer music festivals. We know a few things. We know that restaurants and cinemas won't open right away. But what we don't know is when people can get back to work and when people can begin to lead, what life used to look like.
What we've seen thus far from what's been said about Austria, Denmark, places like that, and even, as I say, Spain and Italy, is it's differentiated according to geography, certain parts of the countries, other parts of the countries, and also certain business classes. There's differentiation. Is there a differential effect in France between, for example, the large cities on the one hand and the rural countryside on the other?
Sure, and there's also a difference within the large cities, and some people have been predicting that there will be class conflicts afterwards, or class pressures, because who's at work? The guys who clean the streets are at work. The police are at work. I was talking, this is a personal anecdote, but I was talking to the cashier fellow in the supermarket the other day, and he said, yeah, he's driving 40 minutes each way to come into work in France and sit, behind a plastic shield in the supermarket. Everybody who can work from home, who's computerized and doing what the French call teleworking, has it much easier. It may be very difficult to be confined in your apartment or your house. People in the country, people who 20% of the Paris population, left Paris to go to their country houses. So, in fact, what you've got is a situation where it's not only different from country to country, but it's different, as you say, for lots of people within the country. And the people who are frontline workers are not only the medical frontline workers, but the people who are keeping the place ticking. There are still bus drivers working. There are still people, driving the metros around. There are still some taxi drivers because they need to make a living. And they think that, everybody else who can work from home or doesn't have to go into the office has it a lot easier. So we'll see whether those tensions rise to the surface later. For the moment, obviously, you can't see them because everybody's locked down.
Nicholas, finally, is it just too soon for a country like France, or for that matter the United States, to start talking about what you talked about, the supranational bodies? Because at some point, this is a global pandemic. We're going to have to deal with it globally, and yet every country seems to be worried about themselves. IMF, for example, France has said that the United States doesn't want to support an additional $250 billion in special drawing rights for some of the troubled countries.
Well, that's right. And if you think about it, as I said before, there are two problems. One is that this affects everybody differently, even though it affects everybody. We've never seen anything like this before. And the second thing is that it's all five crises at once: health, social, financial, economic, and political. And so these different responses, obviously France has a different feeling about Africa than the United States does. Some of the changes that we'll see will be slow, such as, I think clearly China we're too dependent on China, and we'll end up, people pulling their supply chains back. But for the moment, the supranational institutions are not providing answers, and that is going to be a big strain on the international system going forward.
Yeah, no question about it. Nicholas, really appreciate you joining us from Paris. Stay safe over there.
Well, thank you.
Nicholas Dungan, he is a visiting fellow with the Atlantic Council. And coming up here on Balance of Power, we're going to talk about banks. We've had earnings from J.P. Morgan and from Wells Fargo this morning, and the market didn't particularly like what they had to say. We're going to talk with Shania Bossack about that next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
Right now, Doctors Without Borders medical teams are operating in some of the most remote and dangerous corners of the world. When front yards become front lines, at the crossroads of conflict and epidemic, where there are no hospitals, that's where we operate. Your response is critical to our response in places where few others will go. That's where we operate. Learn more at doctorswithoutborders.org.
Whether it's another day of market misery, pandemic emergency, or both, one thing will still go right.
We have the latest world and national news.
Karen Moscow and Nathan Hager bring you the most accurate coverage.
The White House is looking for additional ways to support the economy.
Bloomberg Daybreak.
We continue to watch equities around the world.
Weekday mornings at 5 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television Radio. I'm David Weston. Well, the banks started their earnings season today. We had reports out of JP Morgan and Wells Fargo, and we're going to get the rest of the big ones in the next 2 days. Here to give us an initial report, at least, is Shonali Basak, who reports in the banks. So, Shonali, initially the markets seemed to like what what JP Morgan and Wells Fargo had to say, but then they changed their minds.
Here's the thing, David. Even though initially we saw massive loan loss provisions from both JP Morgan and Wells Fargo, the reality is we don't know how much worse it will get into the second quarter. And we also don't know, for example, how long it will be until most of their customers are able to really pay back a lot of their loans. The forbearance measures have taken effect into a lot of their clients. A lot of people have been drawing down credit lines. And the reality is right now it's not so bad, but we don't know how bad it will get. So that uncertainty is really starting to burn at people.
So, Shonali, how much should we read into the next three big earnings that we got coming up? Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, Citi, and things like that, into what we saw so far today? Or are there banks, is there a divergence here about their exposure?
There will be a very significant dispersion in their exposure. If you think about it, Citi has an enormous international business that we have to consider because those international clients will also be reporting a different set of issues. Then we also have Goldman Sachs, which has a big merchant bank to consider in terms of their private investments and how that will fare as they build a $10 billion war chest to deploy into private deals. At Bank of America, which is kind of the more immediate concern tomorrow morning, net interest income, where we know will be lower at JP Morgan and at Wells Fargo, will also be of interest tomorrow morning when we see Bank of America's figures. We'll be looking at those loan losses some more. But on the trading desk side, we did see great numbers from JP Morgan. We don't know whether those figures will hold up as strongly at the next set of banks that are yet to report this week.
Well, I was going to ask you that specifically because I did see the trading numbers were really quite good for JP Morgan especially. Does that say something, for example, for Morgan Stanley or from Goldman Sachs that in the past at least has really relied upon trading?
You would hope so because both of the banks that you had named, Goldman, Morgan Stanley, a lot more of their revenue does come from trading and investment banking where deals have been very muted. Debt underwriting has been great, but we have not had that much luck in the advisory and IPO businesses. And that fell lower than expected at JP Morgan. But with fixed income shining so brightly and Morgan Stanley being the leader in equities and trading volumes being where they are, the hope is here that trading will hold up for this quarter, yet that's in hindsight. We don't know what the next 2 quarters are going to look like.
And of course, one of the things everybody's going to be looking at is controlling a cost, because we know it's going to be a rocky road for the banks. But that's the initial one, the first two of the five. Thank you so much, very much to Shonali Basak. Coming up here on Balance of Power, we're going to talk to the Massachusetts Attorney General. She is Maura Healey. She's using her office to try to protect those most vulnerable to the coronavirus crisis. Maura Healey, Massachusetts Attorney General, coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. U.S. stocks are climbing on signs that the coronavirus outbreak is either leveling off or easing. The Dow is up 420 points, S&P up 60, the Nasdaq climbing 242 points. Stocks are also rising today as investors assess the latest first quarter results. Shares of Johnson & Johnson are up after posting stronger sales than anticipated, but J.P. Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo are falling after profit came up short. The International Monetary Fund is forecasting the global lockdown will produce the steepest recession in almost a century. The IMF sees the global economy contracting by 3% this year. And Grubhub, DoorDash, Postmates, and Uber Eats are facing a lawsuit that could reach class action status. The lawsuit claims they charged higher fees for menu prices during the pandemic. Donna Wilson, Bloomberg Radio.
Why is delivering the best client experience a top priority at BNY Mellon's Pershing? Michelle Feinstein, Director of Client Engagement, explains.
Today's investors want a financial relationship that's on demand, customized, and leverages the latest digital technology. At BNY Mellon's Pershing, helping advisory firms and broker-dealers create great experiences for their clients is our priority. Through our integrated wealth experience, we give you a high-touch service, flexible technology choices, and expert insights, so you can deliver a highly personalized experience to your clients at every step, from onboarding to wealth planning, to performance analysis and more. And because we're part of BNY Mellon, you'll benefit from more than 230 years of strength and stability. At Pershing, we're personally invested in your success.
Visit Pershing.com to learn more about Pershing's integrated wealth experience. Pershing LLC and Pershing Advisor Solutions LLC are both members of FINRA and SIPC.
Tom has been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. And I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. I was really starting to worry.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
In these times of loss and crisis, the people you trust to ask the questions you need answered become even more vital.
Should the president, though, impose the Defense Production Act?
Carol Masser and Jason Kelly.
Help us understand what we know so far.
Bloomberg Business Week.
They are on the front line of the impact of the coronavirus.
Weekday afternoons at 2 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Banks all around the world are doing their best to try to help their customers through this extremely difficult time globally, and that includes RBS. We got to talk exclusively with the chairman, Howard Davies, earlier today, and we talked with him in particular about what his bank is doing for small and medium-sized enterprises.
It is very important because they do create a huge amount of employment in the country, and for many of them, of course, there's been a complete stop on their business. I mean, the most obvious ones being restaurants and hotels, but a lot more, too, who are in the supply chain for the leisure and tourism industry, or indeed for manufacturing industry, which is largely closed down. So it is absolutely crucial. I think the really key thing is that we need to ensure that there is productive capacity in the economy for when the opening up and the upturn eventually comes. Because if we've lost productive capacity because firms have just given up during the crisis, then we will have a constrained upturn. So it's both important on the downside, but it's also very important to position the economy better for the upturn.
How difficult is it going to be for these businesses? I mean, you mentioned, for example, restaurants or, merchants, service businesses that are collecting zero revenue right now, but getting loaded up with debt, some of it with very high interest rates, relatively high interest rates. How hard is it going to be for them on the other side when they come out of this pandemic loaded up with debt?
Well, I'm not sure about that in all cases at all, because, first of all, the furlough scheme from the government means that they can recover most of their employment costs if they're eligible for that, and many, many are. Also, the Corona Business Interruption Loan Scheme, or CBILS as we now know it, does not have an interest rate in it for the first year. So most people whose businesses have clearly been interrupted by CBILS and who are eligible for this scheme will be taking on additional debt, but it will not be at an interest cost. Now, or at least for the first year. Now, of course, the question is whether in the long run those will be viable with a larger amount of debt on their balance sheet. And I suppose the honest answer to that is some will be and some won't be, which is why I think the government and others are now looking at whether in some cases there is a need for an equity instrument at the end of all of this, whereby some entity, some government-backed entity perhaps, takes an equity stake in businesses where they can't survive with that huge amount of debt. Now, that's a problem in a way that we hope we will have, because that's more of a problem of the reopening than it is of the close down. But at the moment, the loans available are at zero interest for the first year under the government scheme.
Do you expect some kind of debt forgiveness? There's been a lot of talk about a jubilee. As a banker, I'm not sure if that rubs you the wrong way, but is that a possibility on the other side of this, Howard?
Well, I guess it is a possibility. It's not something which would be at all easy for the banks themselves to do, because, of course, our money is all somebody else's money. So if I'm forgiving a debt to a borrower, I'm also, spending your deposit, which is not something I guess you'd appreciate. So if that is going to happen, there's going to have to be some public sector involvement in it somewhere, because I don't think the banks would be sensibly advised to do that. Apart from anything else, if a bank creates a big hole in its balance sheet, then credit is going to be constrained when we eventually do reopen the economy, and that is absolutely what we don't need. Because in the last financial crisis, of course, the problem was why the recovery was so weak for so long, is that banks who had big holes in their balance sheets couldn't extend credit on the scale they had before. Now, this is not the same crisis at all. This is a real economy, a health crisis, not a financial crisis. But what we must avoid doing is turning it into a financial crisis and getting into a situation where the economy cannot turn up because of a credit crunch. So that's the calculation I think the government have got to think very hard about.
That was RBS Chairman Howard Davies is an exclusive discussion with our very own Matt Miller. Well, sometimes crises can bring out the very best in us, and unfortunately sometimes the worst. And sometimes we need our legal authorities to make sure it's the former rather than the latter. We now welcome somebody who's on the front lines of that effort. She is the Massachusetts Attorney General. She is Maura Healey, and we welcome her now. So welcome, Madam Attorney General. Give us a sense of what you're finding with Massachusetts. What have you needed to do? What actions have you needed to take to protect the most vulnerable among us from this crisis? Okay, I'm so sorry. We're having some technical difficulties getting the Attorney General from Massachusetts. We're going to make every effort to come back and get her shortly. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
The sports world is full of inspirational stories of heroic figures. It also has its fair share of shady characters. For detailed retellings of the darkest sagas in sports, explore TuneIn's documentary podcasts, like 30 for 30's The Sterling Affairs, about the scandalous life and times of the former Clippers owner, Donald Sterling. and Gladiator, which follows Aaron Hernandez's transformation from Super Bowl star to convicted murderer. For these and more, search sports documentaries on the TuneIn app. Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with a podcast on TuneIn. For expert analysis straight from the WWE to Steve Austin's no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen.
For weeks, we've heard about panicked shoppers causing a run on toilet paper by irrationally hoarding it. But that ignores one key factor.
That the toilet paper you use when you leave the home is not the same toilet paper you use at home.
How incomplete information, whether about supply chains or infection rates, leads to incomplete narratives. Don't miss this week's On the Media from WNYC. Listen to the On the Media podcast from WNYC Studios on TuneIn today.
Get your MLB fix with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Fill your seventh inning stretch with the Ringer MLB Show.
I just can't get over it. It's like, oh, well, Jeter Downs. Didn't realize he was a top. Like, my dad is drinking the Kool-Aid on this. He's like, of course. Mookie was going to leave. I'm like, what do you mean? You don't know that.
Slide into second with the Starting Nine podcast.
Nolan Arenado slides right into the top spot for a favorite baseball player. Active in the league right now. It is a pleasure to be sitting next to you, sir.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is we've been waiting a long time for this. We actually, in terms of like active
Round the Bases with the Statcast podcast.
Ways of going about it. I picked third, so in some ways it made it easier for me. Mike, just to go over the first couple of picks. Mike took Barry Bonds, who I think was kind of the obvious guy to take number one. Not only
catch these and more MLB podcasts right here on TuneIn. Hit the court anytime with these great NBA podcasts on TuneIn. The Low Post.
So what struck you about this potential head-to-head matchup? What did we learn now that Zion is involved and LeBron and Zion go at each other for the first time?
I still think both teams have to figure out kind of who are their guys when they get into a fourth quarter. I think you saw that with both of them. There were some kind of odd moments.
The Ringer NBA Show.
Who ended up winning the thing. But I did watch for a little bit when it was DeAndre Ayton and Zach LaVine playing against each other. And then as the days went on, Devin Booker was involved. Tell me you've seen the clip of Devin Booker when I can't remember who his opponent was.
Or the Haber Show.
At the end, it's because I worked in the NBA in a front office, and when I was 14 years old, my family moved back from Sudan to America. I went to high school here in New York
Find these and more NBA podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Want to know a quick, easy way to see if your favorite podcasts have a new episode available? Just go to the home screen on your TuneIn app and see the latest editions under the Your New Episode section. Happy listening.
To help make the most of your time at home, TuneIn is sharing our top activities for social distancing. Tip number 5, cooking something. We all get stuck in a culinary rut with our normal routine. Shake things up in the kitchen by trying an ambitious new recipe or an over-the-top dessert. If cooking really isn't your thing, you can always support your local restaurants by ordering out. For more indoor inspiration, search Listen from Home on TuneIn.
Wondering what to play next? Want to know what other TuneIn listeners are listening to right now? Head to the trending section under Browse to explore the most popular stations and podcasts on TuneIn today. Millions of listeners like you can't be wrong.
Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind. Giving up, I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the country.
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier. That also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is,
or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn.
We see
clients who are talking about on-sourcing, about bringing different component parts of their supply chain back to whatever their home country is. And, of course, unfortunately, there might be a rise of nationalism and a lot of finger-pointing about who's responsible. But certain parts of globalization have truly become virtual. And I'll tell you a quick story. When I was in Uganda just about late November, before the crisis all began, I met a young woman who was receiving a scholarship because she was awarded a genius grant. And at age 14, I asked her how she did all of this, and she simply held up her mobile phone to me, and she said, I have access to the same libraries in the world, the same research. I can do anything I want with this simple phone connected to a solar panel in my small village where I live in a hut with a dirt floor. That type of globalization, that democratization of ideas, where we have people all across the globe who can now actually turn that creativity and that intelligence onto the world's problems, onto the world's challenges, that part of globalization is going to be furthered about this. You're going to find people who really perceive themselves in a new generation as global citizens at the same time that they'll find that more things may need to be manufactured right in that small village.
And finally, Joe, I want to take advantage of you while we have here, just for 30 seconds, 45 seconds on politics, because you were the chair of the DNC at one point. We now have President Obama now endorsing Vice President Biden in addition to Bernie Sanders yesterday. This is all over, but how different is this election going to be given what's going on with coronavirus?
It's really impossible to exaggerate how different it's going to be, David. We've just never seen an election like this. And we've also never seen an election that obviously is started so early. You can argue the election really never ended from 2016, but we clearly have a nominee of both parties much earlier than we've had in decades, at the same time that neither of them can go out and meet people. They're both going to have to rely on a virtual campaign. They're both going to have a very different dynamic with conventions that are exceptionally late, so access to federal money will be much smaller than it ever has been before, as well as one candidate in Vice President Biden who has been sidelined by not being immediately involved in the solutions to the crisis. I think the reality of it is this was always going to be essentially just a vote on the qualities and the character of the incumbent, that it almost did not matter who the nominee of the Democrats was because of the polarization there is over the incumbent president. And so whether or not that changes the outcome or not is a very different question, but it's certainly going to be a very different campaign.
Yeah, indeed. So many things are so different. Thank you so much, Joe. Really appreciate you being with us. I hope you come back and give us a report again. That's Joe Andrew. He is global chairman for Denton's, the world's largest law firm. And now we want to go back to the question of Massachusetts and the Attorney General. As I said, these crises really affect people differently, and we've particularly seen some of the less fortunate among us and some of the struggles that they have. They tend to be more prone to have the underlying health problems, and yet they have fewer resources. And so one of the questions we have and our legal authorities have is how can we do our best to protect them from people who could take advantage of them, or just the system which does not treat them as well as otherwise they might. One of the people who's really leading this fight is Maura Healey, and she is the Attorney General of Massachusetts, and we welcome her back now. I'm so delighted that you were patient with us. We got you back because we wanted to talk to you, Madam Attorney General. Give us a sense of what's going on in Massachusetts, what you're seeing, and what you're doing.
Well, a few things that we're seeing. One, you see people out there on the internet, Instagram, Facebook, they're marketing coronavirus vaccines, treatments. All of these are scams. And so in response, we go after them and quickly try to shut them down. We also see people who are setting up these charities where they pretend to be asking for support to support coronavirus victims. And again, they're scams. And so we're just encouraging the public to really do their homework before you ever give money like that to what you think is a charity. We've seen a lot of lately, a lot of people reaching out via phone call or on the internet, promising small businesses disaster relief and, pretending to help them with their application for that federal money, which people are so desperate for. And so we've been really clear with the public, only go through the public sites to apply for and obtain that relief. But it really runs the gamut. I mean, recently there was a woman named Suzanne, she called herself, who was calling around offering to help people with their student loans for a fee. So we're monitoring this. We're encouraging people to report these scams to our office, and we're taking action as we see it.
So do you have something like a hotline, Attorney General?
We do. In Massachusetts, we have a hotline set up. And we also have a way for people to file directly online or through social media with our office. So we've got those lines fully staffed up. We had to fight off unlawful debt collection, price gouging, that began a few weeks ago, and similarly for these types of scams.
If you discover these, what can you do about them? Your court system's closed down, isn't it? Can you take people into court?
Well, it really ranges. Some of this stuff is coming from overseas, so it's harder to chase. But, I mean, sometimes it's just a matter of tracking down who owns the site, calling them, sending cease and desist letters. We've had success doing that. We also make sure that we warn the public immediately so that they're on the lookout for these kinds of unlawful solicitations.
Look forward to a more hopeful time. For example, when we get a treatment or we get a vaccine, how will we make sure that people can afford it? Because unfortunately, the wealthy have the first access to these things, and yet a lot of the people, as I said, who have been most badly affected have not been the wealthy at all in most communities.
No, it's so true. And not only are they having trouble accessing health care, I mean, our whole healthcare system is so strained right now, and you see the holes and the failings there. But, remember, a lot of these folks are frontline workers, but a lot of these folks, too, have been laid off. They've lost their jobs. And so we're going to need a whole safety net and a whole lot of funding to support them and to help them through this time. And so, this isn't a weeks or months long endeavor. This really is going to take us, I think, years to recover from, to rebuild from. But, my hope is that we rebuild in ways that are more equitable, that deal with some of the underlying disparities that, result today in Black and Latino populations disproportionately being affected, sickened, and killed by the coronavirus. So we've got a lot of work to do. But with this devastation comes a lot of opportunity to rebuild in a more positive direction, I think.
Well, that's very hopeful on your part, and I hope that you're right, goodness knows. At the same time, you mentioned the healthcare workers. There are some reports, some places, that perhaps people have been hoarding some of the personal protective equipment, things like gowns and masks and gloves. Is there a way for you to discover that and go after it? Is there any legal recourse?
Well, there is, and some states have actually issued orders that prohibit that kind of stockpiling. We, through our office, have, encouraged the public to make donations to turn over what they have for PPE that is so desperately needed right now in our hospitals and on the front lines. And we're also encouraging the public to donate. We've had a lot of just companies that happen to have PPE. These weren't even necessarily healthcare companies who are donating that. We've also seen in Massachusetts a really wonderful effort by many of our manufacturing companies who, may have been making athletic apparel, but now are turning around and making masks or making gowns. And, every little bit helps right now in this time.
Yeah, we heard your governor, Charlie Baker, just yesterday identify some of those athletic companies who are really donating things. Turn to a different issue, because up in Massachusetts, again, your governor, Charlie Baker, announced this tracking and tracing pattern with Partners in Health, really to try to isolate and identify the people who have the virus and might spread the virus. Does that raise issues for you in terms of privacy? Because we now see Amazon and Google, for example, are saying they're going to have an app up that will tell us who we've been in contact with. Do we have to consider that balance, or is this a bad enough crisis we say, look, we need to worry about saving people's lives. We'll get to the privacy later on?
Well, I think it is a matter of public health right now. That is the priority. That said, there is a way to do it to account for people's privacy. I think you need strong, this has to be government-led so that the right protections are made in place. But certainly whatever we can harness from the private sector, we should be looking to harness. And the fact of the matter is we're not going to see the economy open, as many people are clamoring for, until and unless we have measures in place to do that contact tracing, to test to see who has the antibody, and maybe able to return to work, to see who's had the virus, right, and who's come out of it. And ultimately, we do need to get to a vaccine. So I think people need to be patient. It's a terrible situation, I know, for everybody. But the fact of the matter is, until and unless we have these measures in place, we're not going to be able to open things back up. And we've got to get that right, and we've got to put public health as the priority ahead of everything.
And a final area, Attorney General Healy, if I may, is I mentioned before the court system. I'm not sure what's going on with the court system in Massachusetts, but you have a big office that has a lot of business and a lot of work to do without a coronavirus. What happens to all that work when we have this crisis pending? Can you do both at the same time, or do you have to suspend a fair amount of what was going on just so you can focus on the issues surrounding this crisis?
Well, it's a good point, but fortunately we have been doing both. Our office went virtual weeks ago, so everybody's been able to work safely from home. They're preparing briefs and filing briefs in court. The courts, while not operating the way they used to in terms of not allowing people in and out, are nevertheless taking electronic filings. They're having telephonic hearings and video conference hearings. So that work continues. I certainly have set up within the office a COVID response team, and we have many people across the office working on this. We have our healthcare folks working, our consumer folks working. In the early days, they issued regulations to end debt collection and price gouging. We've had to work on other economic issues, like working with the utilities to stop shutoffs in people's home of their utilities, working to make sure that workers are protected. Our Fair Labor Division is active, fighting for workers for paid sick leave and the time they need to care for themselves and their families, but also that they're working, whether it's in a grocery store or an Amazon distribution center, with the right kind of PPE, equipment to protect themselves. So it's been a full-out effort from my office, but I think you see the scope and the breadth of our Attorney General's office and what it's capable of. But we've also kept all our hotlines open, and the work continues. It's just done in a different way. We've certainly learned a lot about the fact that we're able to work and accomplish a lot through video conferencing and telephone conferencing and the like. But we found a way to continue.
Yeah, we're all learning an awful lot, but that was really helpful. I'm delighted that we got you back. That's the Attorney General of Massachusetts, and she is Maura Healey. Thanks for being with us. This is Bloomberg.
There are times when you have to go it alone, but these should not be those times.
Would the medical crisis in any other central bank execute?
Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Jonathan Farrell.
Walk me through the dynamics that are going to shape the euro in the coming months.
Weekday mornings at 7 Eastern.
Do we have the ability to coordinate with this virus?
On Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com.
When things move this quick, do things break?
Bloomberg, the world is listening.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Message and data rates may apply. T&C and privacy terms can be found at babbel.com/terms. Please don't text and drive.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then try Babbel for free by texting EXPLORE to 64,000. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just text EXPLORE to 64,000 and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or text EXPLORE to 64,000 and try it for free. Text EXPLORE to 64,000.
Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. While we've been having our program here, President Trump has been meeting at the White House with some survivors of the COVID-19 virus. And among the headlines coming out of that, he said that he plans to announce a deadline to reopen the economy, as he put it, very quickly. This is part of that tug of war that he's having back and forth with several state governors about exactly who decides and when we are going to reopen the economy. Maybe part of the reason he is optimistic is he thinks that Gilead drug, remdesivir, is actually having some good results and is promising. So President Trump continues to be the optimist. As he says, he's the cheerleader for the nation. That does it for Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston.
This is a Bloomberg Pursuits Look at Luxury. Coronavirus is doing strange things in the car world. Ford, GM, McLaren, and Tesla are manufacturing medical equipment. Bentley is holding cocktail hours for journalists via Zoom. And Audi, Jaguar, and Mercedes-Benz have released printable sketches of iconic models so enthusiasts can color them at home. Now Porsche is auctioning off what could be one of the last non-turbocharged 911s ever made. The final 7th-generation Porsche 911, a 991 Speedster, is offered at no reserve in an RM Sotheby's auction on April 15th. All proceeds from the sale will benefit the United Way Worldwide Fund for COVID-19 epidemic relief. Speaking of relief, the government's $2.2 trillion stimulus package comes with a perk for high flyers. Flights are getting cheaper for some private jet customers as the legislation suspended a 7.5% federal excise tax on plane tickets through year-end. Mark Mills, Bloomberg Radio.
You're living in a world built on science, political and economic.
You've got to believe the labor market gets hit.
Computer and medical.
Clarify where we are on a test.
It all makes a difference.
What do you think needs to happen in terms of governmental response?
And it's all here.
He expects the virus to peak quite a long time from now.
Get your science straight.
The hand-washing campaign, is this actually a good strategy?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
The average time a resume spends on an HR manager's desk is 7 seconds, and most of them are tossed aside. Now imagine if one of those resumes belonged to Yasmin, who was
living in a shelter, juggling 3 jobs. I had to be resilient. That's something that you can't teach.
We rely so much on a resume, yet it could never tell the full story of someone who
had to be independent and take initiative. And that's how I handle every project I get.
Discover new ways to develop great talent at gradsoflife.org. Brought to you by Grads of Life and the Ad Council.
Hey, y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From
Bloomberg World Headquarters. I'm Charlie Pellet. It is an Up Tuesday with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ extending a rally. S&P 500 index right now advancing by 2.7%, up 74 points at 2836. We've got the Dow up 524 points, up 2.2%, and NASDAQ surging 295 points. That is a gain of 3.6%. So stocks are climbing on signs the coronavirus outbreak is either leveling off or easing, with traders assessing the first reports of the cloudy corporate earnings season. Equities extended their advances. White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow told Fox Business that in the next few days, President Trump will make, quote, some important announcements regarding state guidelines on reopening the economy. We've got gold pushing higher today. Gold up right now by 1%, higher by $17 the ounce at $17.33. West Texas Intermediate crude, though, slumping 6.9%, now at $20.87 a barrel. And with more on the commodities outlook, here's Bloomberg's Renita Young.
The oil demand destruction caused by the coronavirus pandemic is outweighing planned output cuts from the world's biggest producers. Saudi Energy Minister Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman said Monday that the kingdom is ready to trim production even further if needed, but will only cut if others in the alliance reduce their supply accordingly. And haven demand for gold is driving prices today. There's concern that the pandemic will have a devastating effect on the global economy and hammer corporate earnings. Renita Young, Bloomberg Radio.
And among some of the oil names, ExxonMobil down 0.6%, Chevron higher now by 1%. J.P. Morgan Chase said first quarter profit tumbled 69% to the lowest in more than 6 years. J.P. Morgan Chase shares down 2.6%. Also reporting earnings, Wells Fargo, its credit costs surged in the first quarter, previewing a tough year at the helm for the new CEO Charlie Scharf. Wells Fargo, based in San Francisco, lower now by 4.2%. We've got the 10-year up 12.30 seconds. The yield now 0.73%. Gold, as I mentioned, up 1.1%, $17.33 the ounce, and worth repeating crude, lower now by 6.9%. West Texas Intermediate, $20.85 a barrel. It is 1:02 on Wall Street. Time now for the Market Drivers Report with a focus on American depository receipts. And here is Dave Wilson.
Thanks, Charlie. ADRs are higher, though not as much as U.S. shares. The S&P ADR index is up 1.4%, and the S&P 500 is higher by 2.6%. The UK's GlaxoSmithKline has risen 3.1% in U.S. trading. The drug maker joined forces with France's Sanofi to develop a coronavirus vaccine. They plan to begin human trials during the second half. Sanofi has gained 2.9%. ADRs of South African gold miners are higher after the precious metals price rose to a record in the local currency, the rand. AngloGold Ashanti has gained 4.5%, and Gold Fields has advanced 9.1%. France's Total has dropped 1.7%. People familiar with the matter said the oil producer is seeking as much as $11 billion in bank financing. Total is following BP and Royal Dutch Shell in lining up bank credit after crude prices plunged. And Belgium's Anheuser-Busch InBev has fallen 2.5%. The maker of Budweiser beer cut a proposed dividend by 50%, or $1.1 billion, to conserve cash. AB InBev also postponed its annual meeting by more than a month to June 3rd, Charlie.
All right, we thank you very much. Bloomberg's Dave Wilson keeping track of those ADRs. Johnson & Johnson shares surging right now after posting stronger sales and boosting its quarterly dividend. J&J up now by 4.7%. Again, recapping equities higher here. S&P up 70, a gain of 2.5%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Balance of Power.
We have the strongest economy by far in the world.
We need an economy that works for everybody.
I am the one who has the broadest coalition.
Where the world of politics meets the world of business.
They've got the money they need to run a very competitive race.
These lawyers brought the case, and in my view, they should be sanctioned.
We want certainty in the markets. We want certainty in our trading relationships.
The administration is trying to create a new divided world.
Balance of Power with David Weston on Bloomberg Radio.
President Trump plays tug of war with the states over reopening the economy. Bernie Sanders backs Joe Biden for president, and as does former President Obama. And equities surge on hopes we may have turned the coronavirus corner. From New York, welcome to the second hour of Bloomberg Balance of Power. I'm David Weston. We are waiting, even as we speak, we're waiting to hear from either or both of Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey for his daily news conference, or from President Trump after his meeting with coronavirus survivors at the White House just a short time ago. But in the meantime, let's talk a little bit about the markets. Bank earnings began today, but with a decidedly mixed reaction. But that hasn't stopped stocks from surging on increasing indications that the coronavirus crisis may be peaking. To take us through the markets, welcome now Bloomberg Markets Live cross-hat reporter. She is Kriti Gupta. So, Kriti, thanks so much for being with us. What is going on?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It looks like we're just kind of continuing the gains we saw from this morning, really off those bank earnings, like you just said. Mixed report, but a lot of what we were expecting. No news, really. We did see some strong trading revenue beats, of course, on that volatility that we've been seeing in the last few months. Banks really capitalizing on that. But we are also seeing some profits being set aside for loan loss provisions. No surprise there. We are expecting a recession. We are expecting some losses in the credit world, and it looks like the banks are just preparing for that.
At the same time, what is driving the rally today? I've heard that some of the stocks have been pretty badly beaten down. Does that give us encouragement, or does that raise some questions about how strong this is?
So there's some multiple kind of aspects here. You want to start off with, of course, like you mentioned in your intro, the case count. I mean, we have seen stocks move intraday from that Italian case count, from the hospitalization rate in New York. You're starting to see both of those kind of plateau, seeing maybe a small leg lower. Remember, we're not completely out of the water just yet. But that is something that is kind of adding to sentiment here. But you also want to make this a cross-asset story. You're seeing copper grow as well, gain as well. You're also seeing gold gain as well. Those are two asset classes that right now have a really strong correlation to equities. Copper in particular, as you're seeing Chinese demand and kind of a proxy for global growth kind of come back out. That really helping stocks as well. Once again, you're seeing that kind of cross assets.
Well, it's a good day so far for equities by and large, but it's also a good day for bonds, isn't it?
It does seem like it. You are seeing more of a bid for bonds. And what's interesting here is you do kind of have a mixed picture. We were saying that gold it was higher, like I just mentioned. You are seeing treasury bonds higher, but you're also seeing equities higher as well. So what's interesting is it is kind of a mixed picture, but I think right now it's just positioning ahead of these earnings. Remember, we still have some bank earnings tomorrow. We still have more corporate earnings to come. So I think we're just kind of playing this day by day now.
But on the bank earnings specifically, we had J.P. Morgan and we had Wells Fargo this morning. Initially, when the earnings came out, I think both of them went up nicely, and then they came right back down and went into the red.
That's right. I mean, I think at the end of the day, they are not making profits. I mean, if you're bringing it down to the bottom line, I believe J.P. Morgan's number today was profit was down 70%. Now, remember, a big part of that is those loan loss provisions. But you want to keep in mind that is really just putting funds over to an emergency side. So I think the initial reaction was, okay, well, look, they're trading beats, which is traditionally what the kind of move in bank stocks kind of happens off of in earnings season. Those trading beats were very strong, and they did make quite a bit of profit off of those. But then again, you are looking at the overall broader picture, and when you take a big step back, you think, okay, well, wait a minute. Those loan loss provisions are taking a big chunk out of those profits. And I think that's why you're seeing some of those pairing of gains today.
Well, exactly, and it's over $8 billion, as I recall, they took, J.P. Morgan, in loan loss provisions. Assuming that Jamie Dimon isn't just on a whim, that indicates something about what he thinks is coming down the pike, and it's not pretty.
That's right. It's, I mean, like I said, this is largely expected. I believe the CFO of JP Morgan came out and said that if unemployment could be as high as 20%. Remember, this is kind of in line with what we were expecting. The virus still isn't over. The reopening of the economy is being pushed further and further out. This kind of makes sense when you're looking at it. And I think that's why you're seeing potentially more selling in the coming days as we kind of see more of this quantification of what does this demand hit look like. Is this something that companies can really rebound from, or is this kind of something that'll push more companies into bankruptcy, into distressed debt, those kind of questions? And we'll get those answers, like I said, in the coming weeks.
And Kriti, your point about the loan loss provision raises a larger issue, I think, for all the earnings coming up, because it's really for the first 3 months of the year, it's not really giving a sense of what's happening right now. How much is the trading going to be based on what the guidance is given, and what can that guidance be given of? Aren't the CFOs really guessing to a large degree?
They are, and I think that's why you're also seeing kind of some mixed emotions here. You'll see that in intraday trading as well as we go through these kind of earnings numbers. You will see that kind of mixed emotion because right now, once again, a big problem with this virus is the uncertainty of it. Not just do we have a cure, do we have kind of a solution for the hospitalizations in our healthcare system, but also how long is this going to last and what kind of hit does this make to our supply chains? The quantification part of this is really tough. And remember, we're in a world where a lot of these tradings happen on quants, on algos. So being not able to not really put your finger on an exact number really makes trading tough in this kind of environment.
Yeah, and one of the questions I have, because it's happening even as we speak here, is President Trump and his encouraging words about maybe getting started again. To what extent would equity traders really rely upon that, saying maybe we're going to get back to work faster than we thought?
Well, that is always a possibility. I mean, one of the bull cases of kind of the equity market that I've heard is if you're falling in, if you have kind of a record drop, I believe we got to a bear market in record time compared to past kind of dips in equities, perhaps that means a rebound in record time as well. So there is kind of some of those bull cases that maybe kind of the drop in the underlying economy has already been priced in with those kind of really severe moves. As you see more economies recover overseas, that could mean more gains to the United States, especially as, like I said, the supply chains really extend all the way. Tech is a great example of that, where those supply chains really extend to Asia. You're seeing Asia come back online. So really, like I said, a mixed picture here. I think the best advice actually came from Bloomberg opinion columnist Mohammed El-Arian, who said you really have to take this balance sheet by balance sheet and really take the opportunity to pick the strongest companies right now. This is the opportunity to do that.
What about volume? How much trading is going on in equities? Volume of trading, how much trading is going on?
Right. So we actually did see a little bit of a dip in volume ahead of the Easter weekend. So I think some of those gains that we saw last week was kind of interesting because you saw a lot of kind of short covering going into earnings season. But you also could be seeing some selling, like I said, going into earnings season right now. What you want to keep in mind, though, is volume looks to be a little, I'm just trying to pull up this index right now. Volume looks to be a little bit lower still. And what that tells you right now is that there is some kind of hesitancy to get back into the market when we have this corporate earnings rollout period. And what's interesting here is, like, I'm looking at volume right now at the moment, the current tape shows that we're about the lowest in February. That could change going into the rest of the day. Remember, we still have about 3 hours left of trading, but at the moment, relatively low. So it tells you people are really waiting for these results before hopping back in. It's all about earnings.
And what about one more thing you can look up there? Because I can't look it up right now where I am down in my basement. I don't have the terminal right in front of me. What's the VIX at this point? I mean, it was way, way up high, came down some, but where is the VIX right now?
Sure. The VIX is at 38, and that's actually a great question because when we're talking about volatility, a big kind of issue with seeing green on the screen in these equity markets was seeing kind of, well, if these massive swings are happening in both directions, you really can't believe the green on the screen until the volatility comes back down. It kind of calms those market participants. So you're actually starting to see that now. Remember, just a few weeks ago, we hit 83 on the VIX, the highest level ever. Yeah. Now the VIX is at a 38 level, dropping below 40. So still elevated, but still not as high as 83, of course, which gives you some optimism that these swings aren't that drastic. Remember, an S&P gain of 2.6%, although in normal times it does seem a little drastic. For the last few weeks we've had, that's actually a really good sign. To see just a 3% gain, the VIX at 38, as crazy it is as to be saying that is actually a good sign right now that things are starting to recover.
It is pretty amazing that 38 would sound pretty good in the VIX, but it's almost cut in half from what it was. That's got to be encouraging to some extent. We also have to think about the extent to which the government really is driving this. We had Larry Kudlow out today, the chief economic advisor to the president, saying they're going to run out of money for the small businesses even by Thursday of this week. You'd say that's bad because they're running out of money, but on the other hand, that means that much money is getting out the door and into the hands of small businesses, which has got to be good in the longer run.
It is, and I think what's great about the Fed is they've addressed these kind of liquidity cash crunches from every asset class. You see those with their Main Street lending programs. You're seeing that even in muni bonds. They've really come out and thrown the kitchen sink at this thing, which is providing some optimism to the market. Now, what you want to keep in mind, though, is how do you unwind that position? Because the Fed, at the end of the day, is not does not have an endless source of money. You are seeing the balance sheet really skyrocket here. You are already seeing them kind of pull back on some of those repo operations, making the frequency, I believe the headline was yesterday, bi-weekly from weekly. So what you want to keep in mind, though, is that the Fed is actually slowing those purchases too, kind of waning the kind of dependency on that Fed money less and less. But you want to keep in mind that doesn't actually turn sour. The dependency isn't too huge. So what's important here is to watch kind of how the Fed unwinds that dependency, unwinds that loan, so that the economy and the market can kind of rebound on its own without needing that excess money.
Kriti, really great to have you with us. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. It's Kriti Gupta from Bloomberg. And now we want to turn back to that question about who gets to decide when the economy opens back up. At his daily news conference yesterday, President Trump said that it was his call whether and when the U.S. economy would open. But several governors begged to differ, saying that they're working on their own coordinated plans. So which is it? For some answers, we welcome now Professor Josh Blackman of the South Texas College of Law. So, Professor, thanks so much for joining us. I mean, some of this may be political, but let's start with the legal. Is there a clear answer as to whether the president or the governors get to decide what goes on with the state's economies?
There is a clear answer here, and the federal government cannot order the states to reopen. The governors issued the closure orders in the first place, and only the governors can lift those closure orders. This is actually a fairly clear-cut issue. There's a lot of uncertainty in our world, but this one I can say with some confidence.
So what powers of the chief executive could be asserted? I mean, this is, I suppose, not commander-in-chief powers. I mean, if you were arguing for the other side, for President Trump, and you looked at the text of the Constitution, what would you point to?
I usually favor a fairly broad and robust reading of executive power, but the president's powers usually concern foreign affairs, like war-making, negotiation of treaties, diplomacy, etc. On the home front, the president has actually very few powers. The powers on the home front belong to Congress and the states. Congress can regulate commerce among the several states, but Congress cannot tell executive branch officials what to do. If Congress wants something to be done, they can send federal officials to enforce laws. They can't tell the governor how to behave and how to comport himself. So there really isn't anything in the text of the Constitution that gives the president unilateral authority to issue such an order.
President Trump today tweeted out saying that one of his favorite movies was Mutiny on the Bounty, apparently referring to what he would call a mutiny among the governors and saying, by the way, they really need me to supply them with a lot of things like ventilators and personal protective equipment, things like that. Now, I don't know exactly what he meant, but could he give them an incentive, if not an order, to do what he wants them to do by withholding some of that equipment?
Well, that's the rub, right? If the states ask the federal government for aid, Trump could decide to withhold the aid from states that don't follow his wishes. Congress often does this. Congress says if you want highway funding, you have to raise your drinking age, for example. And Congress has some leeway. It's less clear the president can do this by himself, right? The president can establish conditions on federal funding. There may be some pots of money that are discretionary, and perhaps President Trump can prefer red states over blue states. Unclear if those are lawful actions, but he seems to be doing that right now. Even so, the president can't demand the states act. The states would then be at the risk of perhaps losing aid, in which case they'll probably go to the courts, and we know how that one, and everyone always runs to the courts.
So as far as you can tell, and I understand you're a law professor, you're not a politician. When the president says what he says, is this mainly a political act to try to put the pressure on the governors and actually foist the blame on them if in fact the economy stays very weak?
I think most of President Trump's statements and tweets are political theater. I don't think he's basing it on any actual law. He's trying.
Professor Blackman, we're going to have to cut you off. I'm so sorry. That's Professor Josh Blackman of the South Texas College of Law. And we're cutting off because Governor Phil Murphy is about to begin his news conference.
As always, to Judy's right, state epidemiologist, Dr. Christina Tan, also I think in the category of now not needing an introduction. We're also joined by Dr. Tan's, one of her predecessors, Dr. Eddie Bresnitz. Great to have you with us, Eddie, as always. And the guy to my left, who's definitely in the category of not needing introduction, Superintendent of the State Police, Colonel Pat Callahan. I think, Pat, it's fair to say on off-topic matters, we have, you said, about 4,000 outages, and hopefully they're going to be resolved by midnight tonight. And not a lot of accidents to report from yesterday, thank God. So thank you for your leadership. We dodged, I think, a little bit of a weather bullet yesterday, although some places got hit up pretty badly. Let there be no doubt about that. Also, we're here with the Director of the Department of Homeland Security and Preparedness, Jared Maples. Nice to have you with us, Jared. Deputy Counsel Parimal Garg is also in the House. I'm going to begin, as we have been for the past couple of weeks, with the numbers. And Judy, I think it's fair to say that when we look at Monday and Tuesday numbers, there's a certain amount of blending that we have to accept given the weekend reality. So just bear with us. It doesn't make the numbers any easier, trust me, but I think you have to sort of look at Monday and Tuesday in sort of an averaging reality. So today we are reporting an additional 4,059 positive test results, which is now a total of 68,824 New Jerseyans who have now tested positive. More on testing in a little bit. According to our online dashboard, accessible, by the way, through covid19.nj.gov, as of 10 p.m. last night, 8,185 residents were reported hospitalized, of whom 2,051 were listed in critical or intensive care, and 1,626 ventilators were in use. And just as importantly, between 10 p.m. Sunday and 10 p.m. last night, 514 residents were discharged from our hospitals. And as we note each day, the dashboard pulls data as it is reported at 10 p.m. each night by hospitals to the New Jersey Hospital Association. And there may be overnight changes or late reports that are not yet reflective in the data. Remember, these numbers are just a snapshot in time for what remains a very fluid and fast-changing situation in our hospitals. And today, with the heaviest of hearts, we must also sadly note that another 365 blessed souls have been lost due to COVID-19 related complications. All of these deaths occurred literally within the past 24 hours. Many of these individuals passed sometime over the past number of days and are now being reported. It does not make it any easier, regardless of when they left us. They have left us. As we do, I'd like to share the stories of just a few of those we've lost in recent days. Eddie Germain, God bless him. Eddie served our state for more than 30 years at the Department of Transportation, and he most recently served as the Director of Bridge Engineering and Infrastructure Management. He was working literally right up until recent weeks, and his last work was on the structural analysis we needed for our federal waiver of the weight limits on our highways for truckers carrying COVID-19 relief supplies. You may remember last week I announced the executive order associated with that. Commissioner Diane Gutierrez Scacchetti, with whom I just exchanged notes, and she's busted up, I promise you. She knew Eddie well. She called him, quote, a gentle spirit and excellent professional. To Eddie's family, I reached out and left a message for his daughter, Bianca. We salute his dedication to our state, and will keep him and each of members of the family in our prayers. And to his DOT family, we are also thinking about each of you working, as Eddie did, to keep our state moving forward. God bless that guy. Bedminster Police Patrol Sergeant Alteric Patterson, there's Alteric, was taken from us on Easter Sunday. He was in his 14th year serving his community and was a beloved member of the township's force. He was promoted to sergeant in 2014. He was only 38 years old. He leaves behind his wife, Brandy. Again, I tried to reach out to her this morning, and children. They are in our prayers, as is his memory, as is everyone in Bedminster who served alongside Sergeant Patterson and all who looked up to him, and there were many who looked up to him as a role model. God bless him. Next, we have Iris Anaida Martinez Arroyo. Iris Anaida Martinez Arroyo. She was an icon in our state's strong and proud Puerto Rican community. She was an educator a cultural manager, and a community and political activist. She was from Santa Isabel, Puerto Rico, but she called New Jersey her home. Iris is survived by 2 sisters, 4 nieces, and a nephew, Vincent, with whom I spoke this morning. And the entire many hundreds, thousands strong brothers and sisters of the Puerto Rican community in our state. May God bless her. We grieve with every family who has lost a loved one. We grieve with the friends they have left behind. We grieve with all the colleagues with whom they worked. We grieved with the communities who have lost icons and leaders and role models. And we grieve because we know we cannot adequately say goodbye to them at this time. COVID-19 didn't just take them. It has taken away our ability to come together to celebrate their lives as we should and as they deserve. That especially makes this illness and these passings so cruel. And it's also what makes it so vital that we continue to do all that we can to defeat COVID-19 so we can come together sooner than later, albeit much later than we would like, to remember these precious lives lost. Here's an update on the map that we've been showing you from time to time that we need to all keep in mind. The lighter the color, the longer it's taking for the virus to double and spread, and that's a good thing. And this was a very different map a week or so ago. And this is a salute to everybody out there, because so many of us have taken social distancing to heart, we've been able to turn much of this map to the light shade, meaning, again, that the rates of COVID-19 spread are slowing and that the curve is beginning, and I say beginning, to flatten. This is the map, in many respects, by which we measure our progress as an entire state. And we must get every county to be the very lightest shade. To do that, folks, we have to keep our foot on the gas. We have to stay at home, absolutely stay at home, unless it is essential for us to get out. And if we do go out, we have to keep wearing our face coverings and keep at least 6 feet apart from one another. We can't take the changes on this map for granted. This could very easily backtrack. COVID-19 can just as easily boomerang back on us if we stop doing what we're doing. Let's only go through this once. Let's keep our focus on what we need to do today, and that's keeping with our social distancing. And again, if we keep it up, I know without any equivocation that we will come through this as strong as we've ever been before. Not without casualties, sadly, as we have seen too many lives lost. But we will get through this, and we will get through this together as one strong, extraordinary New Jersey family. Switching gears, if I could, for a couple of announcements. First, on testing, as was noted yesterday, the PNC Bank Arts Center testing site, which we're operating in partnership with FEMA, will be open at 8 a.m. tomorrow, Wednesday, April 15, and will handle a maximum of 500 tests. To be tested, you must be a New Jersey resident, and you must be exhibiting signs of respiratory illness. The Bergen Community College site, which was open today, will reopen at 8 a.m. Thursday, April 16.
We have been listening to Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey in his daily news conference. As has become the pattern every single day, he started out with a number of new cases, 4,059, bringing the total number of cases to 68,824. He also now gives numbers about new hospitalizations and those number of in ICU, but also the number of discharges, which is 514 in the last 24 hours. And very sadly, another 365 lives lost to coronavirus. And he said that we must continue the social distancing. He said we only want to go through this once, but at the same time that we are making true progress. So that is Governor Phil Murphy of the state of New Jersey. And now for a Biz Flash, we go to Charlie Pellet.
All right. I thank you very much, David Weston. Here's what's going on. Want to pass along one additional headline, this one from Paris. France now reporting 762 virus deaths. That is the highest in 4 days. And from South Africa, word that South African Airways has been denied further funding by the South African government. government. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ, they're all pushing higher right now. A 511-point gain in the Dow, up 2.2%. S&P 500 index up 73. That is a gain of 2.7%. NASDAQ up now by almost 300 points, up 296. That is a gain of 3.6%. We've got the 10-year up 12.30 seconds with a yield of 0.73%. Gold now at $17.36 the ounce, up 1.3%. And West Texas Intermediate crude is down 6.7% at $20.90 a barrel. The import price index posted the largest drop in 5 years as oil slumped. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Chalk it up to the oil price war between Russia and Saudi Arabia and weaker demand stemming from the coronavirus outbreak. The import price index dropped 2.3% in March, the biggest fall since petroleum prices cratered in 2015. Crude oil dropped to roughly $20 a barrel at the end of March from this year's peak of more than $60 a barrel. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
And speaking of oil, again, worth quoting oil one more time, down 6.8% now at $20.86 a barrel. Oil declining as projections for the steepest recession in almost a century outweighed planned output cuts from the world's biggest producers. Among some of the oil names today, ExxonMobil down 0.9%, Chevron up by 1.1%. Bank earnings upon us. JP Morgan Chase said first quarter profit tumbled 69% to the lowest in more than 6 years as credit costs surged. Shares of JP Morgan Chase down 3.4%, and Wells Fargo's credit costs surged in the first quarter, previewing a tough year at the helm for the new CEO Charlie Scharf as the coronavirus pandemic brings the U.S. economy to a virtual standstill. Wells Fargo out of San Francisco down now by 4.4%. Amazon has been one of the standout performers of the current market environment, and the rally has returned the e-commerce company to all-time highs. The advance in the stock comes in stark contrast to the overall U.S. equity market, which has struggled in the face of the coronavirus pandemic. While the S&P 500 is in negative territory for the year, Amazon has climbed nearly 20% over the same period, making it one of the 10 biggest percentage gainers among S&P 500 members. The gains have also lifted Amazon back above the threshold of $1 trillion market capitalization. Amazon shares, they're up right now by 5.4%. Recapping S&P up 76, up 2.8%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that, David Weston, is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Balance of Power with David Weston.
Senator Bernie Sanders took to the internet yesterday with his rival, former Vice President Biden, to endorse Mr. Biden in his bid for the presidency. And then today, President Obama released a 12-minute video saying why he was endorsing his former vice president and why he had helped him so much in fighting things like Ebola and the H1N1 virus. We welcome now Scott Mulhausen, partner at Bully Pulpit Interactive. Mr. Mulhausen earlier served as Deputy Chief of Staff to Vice President Joe Biden. So that part of the process is over, Mr. Mulhausen. What comes next for your former boss, Joe Biden?
Look, it's a pretty great week for the former vice president with the endorsements of Senator Sanders and President Obama. And I think now you continue to coalesce. You use this moment to do everything from further work to centralize the party and continue to galvanize support across the party from the progressives that were not only a part of his, but were particularly focused on Senator Sanders previously. And you see the goodwill that you've built throughout this campaign and that President Obama continues to garner. And that drives you toward galvanizing not only Democratic voters, but also now you begin the pivot to independents as well. It's the time to continue to coalesce behind the vice president. I think that's what you'll see them do.
How important are the so-called Bernie bros to this process? Because there's been a lot of speculation it's going to be hard to get the really adamant supporters of Bernie Sanders to move over to Vice President Biden. Not to say they'll go to Donald Trump, but they might just sit home.
Well, question one is exactly that, as you framed it. Where would they go? And question two is, I think there's a case not only from his career, but from some of the more recent policies policies the vice president's rolled out, that he's the route, right? I mean, he's the route for them if they want to see things from expansion of healthcare on through reduced Medicare age eligibility and a host of other things. It's pretty clear that endorsements like Senator Sanders, like President Obama's, sort of stalwart figures that have resonated with the progressives for the work they've done, and Vice President Biden's own work should land with these folks, and I think should get them increasingly on board. I mean, this is what the coalescing from the primary to the general is, and we hope to see it.
How much do you expect Mr. Biden to move toward Bernie Sanders on policy? Because Bernie Sanders, when he first withdrew from the race, said, well, he wanted to see Vice President Biden really change some of his policy, become more progressive. We heard a couple of maybe modest changes from the Vice President in the last couple of days.
I think you've seen a career from onward where there were a lot of the endorsements of those concepts, sort of fighting for a host of things that Senator Sanders cares about. Vice President Biden's also fought for his whole career. But what you've seen in recent days is, as you flag, you've seen real substantive shift in Senator Sanders' direction, but you'll continue to see the distinctions. I think what you'll see is Vice President Biden continue to tout a healthcare system that, while includes a public option and other things, does not shift fully toward a Medicare for all proposal. So I think you'll see a balance. I think you'll see the continued progressivism that's been illustrated across candidates this campaign, but you also see what makes Joe Biden, and that's ability to appeal to sort of a populist lane, and that can sort of touch on those progressives, but also get mainstream Democrats and independents too.
Give us your best sense about the role of the vice presidential pick in all this. How important is the person chosen? How important is the timing, given the fact that we've already delayed the Democratic convention, and it may well be a virtual convention by the time we get there?
It may well. It is important, and I think the selection matters. I think people want to see there is a vulnerability people, I think, are feeling right now with the pandemic. I think they want to see not only competence out of the White House, but a structure in place to allow for government to continue no matter what happens. And I think that means you want to have your vice president leadership and the ability to work with the president and lead, and also you want somebody who can sort of step in and be a partner in this and join you and have the wisdom and experience to move forward. So I think it matters a lot. I think that's why you've seen a host of impressive candidates bandied about, from Senators Harris and Warren and Cortez Masto onward. I think there's a impressive batch of governors and other leaders you'll see him continue to assess. And the timing does matter, right? Because you want to continue to use it to galvanize the support you've seen this week off the endorsements. Figuring out when to time that and how to time it does matter, and it's a great question that I'm sure they're wrestling with right now.
Whatever happens in this race, one thing I think is certain, which is it's going to be different from any other presidential election ever, as we can't have large groups of people together for the time being and maybe well into the summer. Who knows what happens in the fall? And increasingly, it seems clear that the election will be about one issue, and it will be about the handling of this coronavirus crisis. If you're strategizing with Vice President Biden right now, how does that figure into how do you plan yourself in this race?
It is a straight competency contrast. It is a looking at how it's being handled from this White House and this administration right now versus how you would plan, from surrounding yourself with advisors through a more methodical and thoughtful process to working with governors no matter their political persuasion. I think the idea is, as you singularly focus on COVID and COVID response right now, you illustrate the slow response on one side, and then pretty clearly a sort of more thoughtful, methodical, deliberate, planned response that you saw for 8 years in the Obama-Biden administration, and you'll expect to see again should Vice President Biden be elected.
Are we going to go to the polls in November? I mean, we had this big fight in Wisconsin about the primary. The Republicans really resisted putting off or resisted expanding the voting by ballot. We've heard Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, say she thinks maybe we should consider having it all be mail-in ballots in November. What's going to be the answer?
The answer is going to be, the short answer is I think that no one knows. But I think what is pretty clear is expanding voter access here needs to be a portion of what November looks like, no matter what happens. So either as we begin to emerge from this and people are back out again, they'll do so in more limited fashion, potentially in more spread out locales and the like. So voting has to account for that. And so no matter if people are at voting booths, they'll potentially be there in a more challenging environment. And so allowing access by mail and in other ways is a pretty clear way to say to voters, we want your vote to count. We need your vote to count. And we're going to ensure there are a host of ways where you can cast that ballot.
I mean, you're a Democrat, so this is sort of a softball question. But did the Republicans make a mistake in Wisconsin? One of the things that struck me was not so much the fact that Vice President Biden won, but the Supreme Court nomination. And we had a candidate that was backed very strongly by President Trump, a conservative candidate who actually lost, and I think surprised quite a few people.
It was a pretty stunning process to watch them lurch back and forth as they attempted to ram the election through. But yeah, I think what you're seeing is what you saw in the 2018 midterms and what you've seen intermittently in recent months, which is a real pivot toward concern at how Republicans and the president are handling this moment, and the attempt by the state legislature and the previous governor to drive a host of sort of purely partisan things through at the end of the last term, coupled with, I think, where the president is right now, showed where Wisconsin voters are. And I think looking back, they might have revisited their decision to ram this election through.
Interesting. Do you think they made a mistake?
Yeah, I think looking back, they'd say not only were the optics bad, the press was bad, and the health results are potentially challenging at a minimum and perilous to say the least. But the outcome means that they bet and they lost. So yeah. It sure feels like it.
Fascinating. Okay, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being there with us. That is Scott Mulhausen of Bully Pulpit Interactive. Coming up, the role of natural gas during times of crisis. We talk with Karen Harbert of the American Gas Association. That is coming up on Balance of Power, and we are on Bloomberg Radio.
Why do hedge funds and other alternative managers rely on Pershing for a highly personalized experience? Mark Alderati, a managing director at BNY Mellon's Pershing and head of Prime Services, explains.
In today's fast-paced environment, where the only constants are change and volatility, you need a prime broker who's both steady and agile, focused on supporting your needs so that you can focus on growing your business and producing results. Exceptional client service and advocating for our clients is at the core of what we do. Our award-winning high-touch team is just one of the benefits of working with BNY Mellon. We help alternative investment managers create great experiences for their clients. Whether it's customized financing, securities lending solutions, platform access, or outsourced trading, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and dedicated to meeting your evolving demands.
To learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers, visit Pershing.com. Pershing, LLC. Member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
Message and data rates may apply. T&C and privacy terms can be found at babbel.com/terms. Please don't text and drive.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then try Babbel for free by texting EXPLORE to 64,000. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just text EXPLORE to 64,000 and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or text EXPLORE to 64,000 and try it for free. Text EXPLORE to 64,000.
The Bloomberg Business of Sports.
Because you can't watch Trolls World Tour at the cinema, Sky Store is bringing the cinema home to you with Sky Store Premiere.
I'm going to destroy all music, except for rock!
We need to unite the trolls to save all music.
Our brand new service that lets you watch movies at home that would normally be in the cinema.
Rock and roll! Let's go save the world!
Yes! Prepare for battle. This ought to be good. Enjoy Trolls World Tour now on Sky Store Premiere, bringing the cinema to you.
Behind the highlight reels, championship rings, and colossal paychecks, there are sports stories that fuel, deepen, and even challenge our love for the game. For true tales of underdogs, anti-heroes, and game-changing innovators, explore a sports documentary on TuneIn, like Sports Wars, telling the origin stories of classic rivalries, Raise Sports, about the concussion crisis that threatens football's future, and Dunkumentaries, a podcast devoted to the beauty and power of the slam dunk. For these and more, search Sports Documentaries on TuneIn. Be part of the sports conversation with Sports Talk Radio on TuneIn. Join the discussion around your favorite local teams with sports stations broadcasting in your area.
The game will be 185 to 183 and somebody wins, whatever. Football, it's either full go or it's not. You got it's thud. I can practice what they call
Follow national storylines and debates with ESPN Radio.
Does the NBA have a hiring problem when it comes to front office jobs in the leagues and a minority hiring issue? Stephen A. chimed in on that today on First Take.
It also resonates with me, Max. You can appreciate this position. One of the candidates was Brian Colangelo. We know what happened. I like Brian, but we know.
And hear what's happening worldwide with international channels like Talk Sport.
Seems as I'm sort of doing my life in reverse at the moment. I was on cricket tours when I was 20 years old, and now I'm 31. I'm sat at home injured playing PlayStation. So it's a tournament basically where you create your own character.
In your backyard and around the globe. Keep your finger on the pulse of the sports world with TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Wondering what to play next? Want to know what other TuneIn listeners are listening to right now? Head to the trending section under Browse to explore the most popular stations and podcasts on TuneIn today. Millions of listeners like you can't be wrong.
Get your MLB fix with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Fill your seventh inning stretch with the Ringer MLB Show.
I just can't get over it. It's like, Jeter Downs. Didn't realize he was a top. Like, my dad is drinking the Kool-Aid on this. He's like, of course. Mookie was going to leave. I'm like, what do you mean? You don't know that.
Slide into second with the Starting Nine podcast.
Nolan Arenado slides right into the top spot for a favorite baseball player. Active in the league right now. It is a pleasure to be sitting next to you, sir.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is we've been waiting a long time for this. We actually, in terms of active
round the bases with the Statcast podcast.
Ways of going about it. I picked third, so in some ways it made it easier for me. Mike, just to go over the first couple of picks. Mike took Barry Bonds, who I think was kind of the obvious guy to take number one. Not only
catch these and more MLB podcasts right here on TuneIn. And breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Tuesday rally after signs of the outbreak easing, with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all surging. S&P up now by 80 points. That's a gain of 2.9%. The Dow up 562, up 2.4%. NASDAQ up 316. That is a gain of 3.9%. Equities extended their advances. White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow told Fox Business that in the next few days, President Trump will be making, quote, some important announcements regarding state guidelines on reopening the economy. The 10-year up 13.30 seconds, yield 0.72%. Gold is advancing 1% right now at $17.33 the ounce, up $18 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude dropping another 7.6% in spite of the weekend oil deal. WTI now it's $20.71 a barrel, lower today by $1.69. Again, recapping, equities higher, 80-point jump in the S&P, up by 2.9%, the Dow up 2.4%, NASDAQ surging 3.9%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Balance of power continues, and once again, here's your host, David Weston.
Thanks very much, Charlie. From New York, this is Balance of Power. I'm David Weston. Much of America is spending more time at home home than ever before. At the same time, when great stress is put on our hospital system, what does that all mean for the system that provides natural gas to power so many of our homes and the emergency generators to make sure our critical facilities don't lose power? Karen Harbert is president and CEO of the American Gas Association, and we welcome her now to Bloomberg. So, Ms. Harbert, thank you very much for being with us. You've written a piece, actually, on this subject, and I hadn't really put together the COVID-19 crisis with natural gas, but put it together for us.
Sure, David, and thank you for having me. And to all of your listeners, we know this is a difficult time. And I can tell you on behalf of the natural gas industry, we are doing everything possible and necessary to keep that vital energy source, natural gas, flowing into homes. 180 million Americans use natural gas in their homes, and we're going to make sure that we can deliver that 24/7, 365 days a year. But as you point out, it's not just people's homes, which are now actually schools and gyms and everything else and offices. It's the hospitals. It's the senior centers. It's the restaurants upon which we are relying for delivery. So there is a multitude of uses for natural gas in this country, and you've got men and women in all of our 50 states working very hard to make sure that we have this source, life-saving source of energy in many cases, available for the front lines and at the home front.
Is demand up? I saw actually a headline across the Bloomberg today saying that electricity usage, I think, is down something like 3%. Is demand up? Is it flat? Is it down? Where is it?
Well, it's about the same, but the demand is different in that we're not seeing as much coming from the commercial sector because businesses are closed, et cetera. So we're seeing that shift in demand go to the homes, go to the businesses that are still open, and obviously the healthcare system is using a whole lot more energy. And some of the manufacturing that's being repurposed for ventilators and things like that, we're seeing that demand go up. So it's shifting a bit. I would imagine over time we're going to see it, the curve bend down a little bit. But we're not concerned about demand. We're just concerned about reliability.
And to that point, is it putting stresses and strains on some parts of the system? Because it might vary geography by geography depending on what's happening.
So far, so good. We drill for this stuff. We plan for contingencies. We've got redundancies built into the system because we have to. Because without it, we put a lot of homes and people and families at risk. So we plan for this. It's hard to plan for a pandemic, but I'm really proud of each of our utilities and the workers and their employees, the dedication that they have to get out there and fix problems, to bring this vital source into the home. So we're not seeing a stress yet, but we plan for it.
Well, you raise a very important point. How do you work from home if you work for a utility that's powered by natural gas? I mean, to what extent can employees in this industry work from home? And to what extent can they just can't because, for example, they have to go out and fix lines and things?
No, you're absolutely right. There are some functions that cannot telework, cannot work remotely. And those are particularly our control centers, the people that are out fixing problems in the lines, and also those people that have to go into people's homes. If something happens to their meter or they need their gas reconnected for whatever purpose. And those are obviously things that can't be done remotely. But we have moved our dispatch centers, our call centers. A lot of our executives kind of ironically are considering themselves non-essential so they can manage the utilities from home to allow the frontline utilities the space that they need. So we're really working creatively. I mean, at the end of every shift, people come in and they do their reports. Well, they're not coming in to do their reports. They're doing them remotely now. We're rotating people through the supply center, much, further apart. So they're really going to extraordinary measures, and they have so far proven to be able to deliver, every minute of every day.
You mentioned the need to go into people's homes, which can really be exposing yourself to danger these days because we don't know where this virus is. Are there guidelines for the industry, or is this done utility by utility in terms of protective gear, procedures in order to protect employees going into other people's homes?
Well, we are certainly taking on board all of the recommendations from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, Homeland Security, those that are looking at it from a federal perspective. And we've worked with every one of our members to ensure that they have the highest level of safety guidance that they need. And then it is utility by utility, and they're sharing best practices. We hold phone calls amongst our members every day. And if they encounter a problem or a solution that they would like to share, we give them the forum to do so. But we do have very strict guidelines if somebody needs to go into a house. They talk to the person beforehand. They figure out if there's anybody that could be ill. If there is, they have a checklist that they've got to go through. They have their protective equipment with them. They know how to dispose of that. They know to be in separate rooms. But they're also committed to, if somebody needs a service inside their home, they're going to do it as best as they can and as safely as they can for not only themselves, but for the customer.
So this coronavirus crisis has not just affected people in their homes and their working patterns as well. It's also affected the energy industry. We've seen the oil price collapse, and we obviously have that remarkable agreement entered into actually on Easter Sunday, international agreement on oil prices. But a lot of pressure is being put on the shale industry in this country because of the price of oil and some of the leverage they have. Is that going to affect the supply of natural gas? Because as I understand, a lot of natural gas in this country is provided because it's part of an element of drilling for shale oil.
No, you're absolutely right. It's that associated gas. You know, when you get oil, gas comes with it a lot of the times. And so we're keeping a very close eye on that. But we also have just pure gas production. And in places like not too far from where you are in Ohio and Pennsylvania, they produce a tremendous amount of natural gas. And so at the moment, the supply picture looks fine. We have a lot in storage that we can pull out of storage when necessary. And the other part of this picture that people don't remember, you know, people aren't driving, so the demand for oil is down, but the demand for our product is stable because of how it functions in our economy. So, and it's really affordable and has been for quite some time because of this shale revolution. So the people that are on the financial edge should take some comfort in knowing that their utility bills are going to remain low because the price of natural gas is going to remain low. And we have to remain vigilant that we have enough production. And we certainly talk to our production partners all the time, particularly those that just produce gas.
Yeah, and that raises the question, is the price of natural gas sufficient to support the kind of capital investment that we need?
Well, and we do need capital investment. It's a great point, David. I mean, we have a customer every minute of every day, and that means we need to put more pipes in the ground. We need to build it out to go into people's businesses, industrial facilities, and the price is very low. That's good for customers. It's challenging for producers. It's not too low that they will stop producing, but certainly a slight increase, I'm sure, would be of comfort to the producers. But overall, we have, we're regulated utilities, so we already have our rates locked in, so our customers won't be affected by if there were to be some volatility. But with the amount of gas that's on the market here in the U.S. and around the world, we're in good shape.
Okay, thank you so much to Karen Harbert of the American Gas Association. That does it for Balance of Power for today on Bloomberg Radio. I'm David Weston. Thank you so much for being with us.
Get your daily dose of NFL shop talk with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Start your morning off right with Around the NFL.
Injured, depleted roster into the playoffs, and I didn't think they belonged in the playoffs.
I think overall, though, it was a great divisional round weekend because you got the first one.
Run into the end zone with the Move the Sticks podcast.
We had a fun little Zoom cocktail hour last night.
Oh, yeah.
What a star-studded affair. Greg, you were there for the earlier part, but it really popped off a little later on. We had Zach Goldman.
And dive deep into the sidelines with the Peter King podcast.
On the occasion of his 50th birthday, come down and record a little bit of retrospective on the life and times of Brett Lorenzo Favre.
That sounds like a bestseller.
It sounds like a precursor to a funeral. That's what it is.
I wasn't thinking that.
Explore these and more hard-hitting NFL podcasts right here on TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
TuneIn makes it easy to be a part of the conversation. Just make sure push notifications are enabled to hear about breaking news and trending topics from around the sports world. You'll also get custom recommendations of podcasts and radio stations covering the sports and teams you care about.
Wondering what to play next? Want to know what other TuneIn listeners are listening to right now? Head to the trending section under Browse to explore the most popular stations and podcasts on TuneIn today. Millions of listeners like you can't be wrong.
Get your MLB fix with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Fill your seventh inning stretch with the Ringer MLB Show.
I just can't get over it. It's like, oh, well, Jeter Downs. Didn't realize he was a top. Like, my dad is drinking the Kool-Aid on this. He's like, of course. Mookie was going to leave. I'm like, what do you mean? You don't know that.
Slide into second with the Starting Nine podcast.
Nolan Arenado slides right into the top spot for favorite baseball player. Active in the league right now. It is a pleasure to be sitting next to you, sir.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is we've been waiting a long time for this. We actually, in terms of like active
Round the Bases with the Statcast podcast.
Ways of going about it. I picked third, so in some ways it made it easier for me. Mike, just to go over the first couple of picks, Mike took Barry Bonds, who I think was kind of the obvious guy to take number one, not only.
Catch these and more MLB podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
Live from New York and New Jersey and streaming on YouTube, it is Tuesday, April 14th, 2020. And Jason, we're starting to get a realistic, albeit measured path forward, safe to say.
Yeah, it feels like this is a theme that started yesterday when we saw those 6 governors and then followed by 3 West Coast governors. And now we have CEOs coming out, and like him or not, people listen to Jamie Dimon.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
He was out there today.
Yeah, and people are listening, I feel like, to a lot of things because the markets are higher and maybe investors are pricing in the bad news and really are starting to price in good news, but maybe looking way, way out. Jamie Dimon also kind of looking out to when we reopen the economy.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to hear a little bit from him and some analysis of what JP Morgan said in their earnings, all setting a tone for a way back, as you say, measured, but people starting to get their arms around what that may look like. A lot of interesting conversations ahead.
I got a word for you, patience, everybody. Yeah. All right, we're going to talk about that over the next few hours. First up, your top business stories. Quick check on the trading day. Here is Charlie Pellet.
Quick check indeed. Happy Tuesday to you both. You talked about Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan Chase. Let's begin with bank earnings. Just the quotes. JP Morgan Chase shares down 3.1%. Wells Fargo also out this morning. Shares lower now by 4.5%. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all rallying on some signs the coronavirus outbreak is either leveling off or easy. Traders assessing the first reports of the murky corporate earnings season. S&P up now by 80. That is a gain of 2.9%. The Dow up 555. Up 2.4%. NASDAQ up 318, up 3.8%. We've got the 10-year up 10-30 seconds, yield 0.73%. Gold up 1.3%, 17.38 the ounce, up $22 the ounce. Crude, a major story today. Yes, we got that agreement over the weekend, but look at West Texas Intermediate crude plunging today by 7.2%, down $1.61 a barrel, $21, right now $20.78 on WTI. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. And amid all of this, we've talked about this, Carol. I feel like politics is just taking a back seat. I think we all came into 2020 saying, all we're going to be talking about is the election.
Wait, it's an election year? Yeah.
Bananas.
Exactly. We're going to talk about it, folks, because let's not forget some big news today. Joe Biden getting a big endorsement from not only his former running mate, but also his former boss. We're talking about Barack Obama.
That's right. Yeah, the last guy before President Trump to sit at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. A little later on the show, a conversation I know we've both been looking forward to. Sue Decker, former president of Yahoo, on the boards of Berkshire Hathaway, Costco, among others. She's got a company that is right in, as Tom Keene would say, the zeitgeist, because dealing with college students, dealing with information, social networks. Can't wait to see what she has to say.
All right, we're going to get to all of that over the next couple of hours. Let's set the Business Week agenda, though. Bloomberg News equity markets reporter Elena Popina is with us. She is on the phone in New York City. And Dave Wilson, our stocks editor at Bloomberg News, he's on our access line from New Jersey. Hey, Dave, set the scene. We've got a rally underway, but we took off, and then we pulled back, and then we took off again. So tell us a little bit about the trade here.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been a bit of back and forth. And today, what's interesting is that you're seeing consumer stocks of all types lead the way. remember, there are two categories within the S&P 500. You have the makers of consumer staples, food, beverage, tobacco, household products, and then you have the more discretionary companies. Think about all the stocks that have been beaten up lately, and most of them are in there. I mean, whether you're talking about retailers or cruise line owners or airlines, you name it. And they're really at the forefront of the gains. And beyond that, what's interesting, I mean, we've already started talking about the banks. Early on, the shares actually went up in response to the results. It was almost like people looked at sort of their financial position and said they're not really getting hurt so much, even as they take these multi-billion-dollar increases to their reserves for potential losses down the road. And it's like everybody, after sort of the initial reaction, looked at these companies and said, you know, they're going to have a lot to work through in these next several quarters. And you see the shares down now as a result. Like I said, JP Morgan and Wells Fargo, also Bank of America and Citigroup, whose numbers are coming out tomorrow. And then there are the energy stocks, which have, for the most part, followed oil prices lower. So, you know, a real mix in today's trading, even though the dominant theme is that the shares are moving up here.
Yeah. So, Elena, come on in here, because we look to you and your team for big themes as well, and sort of movements across a bunch of industries and individual names. What does this week feel like? Today's, you know, was maybe a surprisingly green day. Yesterday seemed to be a bit of a breather day after last week, which was, I'm going to keep going back to this probably throughout the show, a little bananas in its own right. So what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. We are particularly interested in NASDAQ 100 technology stocks. They are up 4.2% today, and as of right now, they're down just 10% from that high on February 19th. So 10% loss is better than the loss in the S&P, in the Dow, in all major indexes. The FANGs are rallying. They did have a really good day yesterday. They're continuing the momentum today. What's interesting, though, was that something happened yesterday that never happened before. Check this out. So the NASDAQ 100 gained more than 1% on the day when the S&P lost more than 1%. So since the inception of the NASDAQ 100 index in 1985, this has never happened. What does this tell us?
Really? Hold on a second. That's never happened?
So wait. Never, ever happened when the NASDAQ gained more than 1% on the same day when the S&P 500 lost more than 1%. Yesterday was the first day ever when this happened since 1985 inception of the NASDAQ 100.
So what does that mean? Beyond that, we folks who like to have, you know, round numbers and these cool things happening. Yeah, exactly. So what does it really mean, though?
A lot of this is very important during this earnings season, because that means that technology has the bandwidth to, you know, help us out and help out the broader S&P 500. We're going to see earnings from these major technology companies later down the road. This week is all about banks. But this means that probably the worst has already been priced in for some of the technology companies. And that optimism, we saw that during past sell-offs in 2016, in 2018, technology led the broader S&P 500 higher. So this gives us some confidence that this could happen right now.
Forgive me for interrupting, but I was thinking about, Jason, our conversation yesterday with Randy Watts. You know, he's a technician. He really drills down into the markets, and he said that what we need to do is see leadership in those companies that were formerly, you know, leaders. We really need to see them come back. His point was, don't chase the beaten down stocks, but a lot of stocks that have bounced are formerly leadership companies, and you need to see that. So whether it's the likes of Amazon and some of those tech names that really led, you know, us to one record after another, you know, Elena, that's what it sounds like you're talking to.
Yep.
All right, so Dave, final word to you in the last 40 seconds or so we have here. What else are you looking for today as we get deeper into this trade?
Well, I just wanted to follow up on, you know, what's happening to those biggest companies, because I'm sitting here with my Bloomberg terminal. Amazon back above $1 trillion in market value, up 36% from its low last month. And you've got Apple up 28% from its March low. You run the numbers on Microsoft, so the other member of the $1 trillion club, and you're seeing a comparable sort of rebound there. I'm just looking, and as soon as my fingers will type the right things, I'll tell you we're talking about a gain of 28% there as well. So it just goes to show you the market leaders have reestablished themselves as leaders. And we're going to come back to this idea of the NASDAQ 100 versus the S&P 500 next hour with my chart of the day.
But just think about that, right? If you put money at the low, I mean, you can't time the market, but nonetheless, if you had done it, think about the jump, 38, 40% in a name.
I know.